Welcome to Valley Strange. I don't remember what episode this is, but this is a continuation of our reading through William Bramley's Gods of Eden. And it's been a while since we've attempted this episode or this book. Probably about 2 months, 2.5 months, 3 months.
Yeah,
probably.
I was busy,
probably about 3 months. Yeah. So
I was busy spreading around bubonic plague. So
yeah. So we're back, and we're gonna try and tackle this and finish this book, and I think we can do it. So
excuse me, sorry, Daniel. So-called bubonic plague.
Right. Bear with us, everyone. We're gonna go for it. So last episode, we left you off with the chapter of Maverick Religions, and we went through like a list of reading of some of Bramley's points between a Maverick religion and a custodial religion. And go back and check out that episode because we're not going to go back over it again. So
yeah, and the only thing is, I was thinking about the kind of like, what happened in the last episode and relevance tying into this one, and trying to do this real quick, but just a real quick reminder of Maverick versus a custodial religion. Maverick religions were in response to some of the domineering, some apocalyptic, stuff that we'll get into in this episode, or apocalyptic messages and tones.
Right.
And these are what Bramley conceptualizes as, or argues are honest attempts at trying to generate a science of salvation,
Right.
or a science of the spirit.
There we go. Yeah, they're trying to elevate like society's spiritualism, some sort of thing. Which is like the exact opposite of the custodial
and it's
religion.
only kind of like, go check out the episode, read Bramley himself, guys. But just because some of these ideas from the Maverick religions versus custodial religions are going to be present in particularly the first couple chapters we're going to talk about today.
That's correct. So the first chapter that we're going to go into, it's the next chapter. It's chapter 11. It's the Doom Prophets, but again, like we always do, we have to introduce ourselves. My name is Ray, and then we also have Roland, looking somewhat dead in his studio over there, but still surviving.
I'm alive. So
and we also have Daniel
to speak
in his studio as well.
Hey-o.
Okay, so chapter 11, the Doom Prophets. Hope that's affected later on in audio production.
So I've always known that prophets. Like so many religions had like Genesis myths and apocalypse myths, but I never made like a connection between them all, that was like a prevailing theme or whatever that like this guy seems to bring out, which was kind of interesting to me to see.
And are you talking about like the fact that all the religions kind of have
a judgment day?
Well, yeah. It seems that all religions have a beginning and an end, because if there is no end, then what's the point, or if it's recycled, like
right? Yes.
Yeah.
It's sort of a cycle that never reaches the final stage, right? Because everyone always sort of talks about how we're in the end times and it doesn't happen, and then actually if we review the text again, in 10 years' time, we're all fucked, kind of thing. So yeah, they sort of just perpetuate.
Right. I mean, with most religions, there's got to be some kind of promise of a end utopia, like at the end of the suffering finally. Uh-huh. And
or does it? Because these ideas of the apocalypse, and doomsday are, according to Bramley, byproducts of custodial and brotherhood influences and activities. Just to get right off the bat, for our listeners who have never heard of what an apocalypse is, it just comes from the Greek and just translates to like an unveiling, a uncovering, a revealing of what's supposed to be, some sort of utopia, whether it be classless or structured or whatever. Everyone's got their own flavor of it. But essentially the idea is that, mankind gets thrown into a cataclysmic time, and God or the gods or whoever, is in charge, puts everyone in judgment. And basically the people that played ball in their lives and believed in that particular branch of, philosophy or theology rather,
Yeah.
gets saved, everyone else gets damned. And after the battle between, the ultimate battle between good and evil, God and Satan, God is supposed to triumph, and then the utopia begins.
Right.
Who was like the ones that created the doomsday prophecies, according to Bramley?
Oh, as far as like, okay, cool. Because I was like, well, the custodians, duh. But
that's the overall answer to like all of this, because they're the ones in charge, pulling the strings. But like as far as like the human beings or the human pawns within this system here.
Well, early we can just target, one of the early Brotherhood symbols. It comes in Egypt, arguably in Mesopotamia, but the phoenix.
Right.
Yes, which was the actual the first bird of the United States. Even they changed it later to the eagle, but yeah, it was another influence as well that can be seen pretty much everywhere. Sorry, go ahead.
So the whole idea of the phoenix, the mythical bird that lives its life, burns up, goes through a period of rebirth as a worm, and then back in the phoenix. Constant cycles of like. Birth, death, rebirth.
It seems to be like a literal personification of like, their religious cycles, which I've never heard of. I'd never heard that exposition. I thought it was pretty interesting. I don't know that I believe it. It seemed, I don't know.
Well, Bramley argues that the myth of the phoenix, whose initial meanings may have been lost to time,
right.
Got co-opted by some of these doomsayers, where they liken that to the spirit. We go through these process of birth, life, trials, death, and then rebirth.
Right.
And rebirth could be into the utopia or whatever the fuck. You can basically take the phoenix myth and take any sort of naysaying doom based prophecy and go, oh, this is a cycle of phoenix, shown here.
Wasn't it sort of like a expansion of the idea of like custodial reincarnation, like the rebirth of the spiritual being, right?
Well, it's not the rebirth of the spiritual being; it's the trapping of a eternal spiritual being into a material body.
It's what's the word? It incarnates itself.
So just to cite Bramley directly when it comes to like the process of the phoenix, and also going to lead into a where did this come from kind of question that he posed right after the fact, or statement that just made me go, what the fuck? Like, nothing you said up until this point makes me think, hey, that makes sense. But as I kind of got to earlier, the legend came to convey the false idea that there exists some kind of unalterable law or plan which mandates that spiritual existence must consist of an arduous phoenix-like process of growing, dying by fire, emerging out of the ashes, growing again, dying again, and so on forever. While this process does seem to regulate life on Earth, it is neither natural, inevitable, nor healthy. And that was one of those moments where I had like a problem, because then he just didn't continue to say like why it isn't natural. He didn't it was one of those just Bramley trust me moments that, we talked about in the previous episodes, and they're going to keep recurring because there's times where he just makes these bold knowledge claims and then drops them and runs to the next idea. And it's a frustrating process to try to analyze and string together his thinking. And sometimes
you don't think the next paragraph sort of explains those, like what he refers to as unhealthy.
What page are you on?
Belief.
Same page.
So the same
113.
113.
Middle paragraph.
Well, it's the paragraph at the top. So you don't think that the paragraph immediately following sort of explains why he disagrees with it as a good idea sort of thing? Because he talks about how most apocalypses veer from the standard Phoenix allegory, proclaiming that this process will culminate in a great final battle followed by utopia. These beliefs encourage people to tolerate and even welcome a world of unremitting physical hardship, conflict, and death. The kind of world the ancient writings say custodians wish their work race to live in. So, I don't know. Like, it seems to me that he's sort of talking about how, which I'm sort of getting ahead of myself because it sort of ties into the last chapter of the King of Rats, in which basically these people, like, everyone is a pawn. People that think that that they run society or whatever are actually themselves being manipulated within like a cage system sort of thing. I don't know. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I could be wrong. Yeah.
Okay. So I know we were talking about the Phoenix and whatnot, but we go through the end of the world teachings. Again, this is what the doomsday prophecies are, and it is like the belief. It's a belief that encourages people to tolerate and even welcome a world unremitting physical hardship, conflict, and death.
Yes.
And one of the persons that he mentions that brought up the end of the world teachings was a person from Persia.
Zoroaster.
Yeah. And he had mentioned there's 4 stages of the universe, or 4 phases of the universe.
I think, well, sorry, I just thought it'd be good to mention, but like it'd probably be more familiar to some people that have any exposure to that he's also known as Zarathustra. So, yeah. Okay,
Yes.
Go ahead.
Would anyone know that?
Well, like,
possibly. I mean, actually, Bramley makes a
but
point to put a footnote about it because he brings up the composer, but thus spoke or spake Zarathustra, which is also the title of a Nietzsche book.
And then he talks about the composition becoming the theme song of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I thought was funny.
But getting back to Zoroastrianism, so importantly, these views kind of pop up pretty early. I mean, because we're talking about, like long con, we're going from Sumeria, 3000 BC to the Egyptians to some of the, the Greeks don't really get talked about too much, but, they come along after this, actually, around the same time. But we're talking about about 750, 500 BC. There's some debate on the dates when Zoroaster lived or whatever, but all that aside, it's just fascinating because, within 1,500 years of the goddamn, master plan starting of the, or being really like rolling from the custodians, then these doomsday beliefs start like trickling into different societies.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of like in Christianity or other or like Judeo-Christian faiths and Islam, you've got, the benevolent creator or whatever, and then the adversary.
Right.
That's where he goes into the 4 stages of the 4 phases of the universe. And I mean, just listening to the 4 phases sounds very familiar in most religions. Like 1 being the spiritual existence, in which the chief god designs the physical universe. And then 2, where the material universe is created. 3, where the battle of the chief god and its rivals.
Well, importantly, in the second phase, that's when the adversary comes about as well. I almost missed that in my reread. But that, thinking about the development of all this bullshit, it's like, because it's interesting in like Zoroastrianism, the adversary comes before creation, or around the same time. Like it's kind of like, is man in the mix already or not? I don't know much about Zoroastrianism, but
we're going based on what Bramley's given us here, which is basically all the information we're trying to just stay focused on, because going out again through this book, we're going to come across times where Bramley again makes these claims and gives us nothing else. So we have to just take his word for it, including with his references to other things as well. We're taking his description or his reference at face value, because I mean, and again, it's not up to us to like explain all that, because that would come for another episode or something like that. Would just make this longer than it needs to be. But it's up to the listener and the reader, as Bramley says, to research themselves if they want to go and look at all that stuff. So the last part of the phase is the succession of the saviors, or the god, the chief god sends saviors to defeat the opponent and bring salvation to all, allegedly.
Right.
And the god that in the Zoroaster, Ahura
Mazda?
Ahura Mazda, right?
Yeah.
And I can't remember what the devils would be called. I've encountered, this story and other bits of lore on Ancient Aliens and stuff, but I just can't remember what the fucking, adversary is supposed to be called, but he was supposed to be a pretty cool dude, I mean,
Aren't they all kind of cool dudes at some point or another?
Angra Mainyu, I think is his name. The destructive / evil spirit and the main adversary in Zoroastrianism.
Word.
Right on.
So we have all this shit going on in Persia, and another thing that's important to note is that Persia became the nation state of Iran, and it's based off of Aryan, because Aryanism, as discussed in this book, was practiced widely in the area, and had influences outwards, which is interesting. But kind of around the same time, you got Judaic doomsday prophecies coming about as well. And then slightly later, you've got Buddhist doomsday prophecies as well. But I would argue that perhaps it's not necessarily like a doomsday, but just like a apocalyptic. As far as like the revelation, the unveiling, like that kind of sense, the taking the cover off and hitting that spiritual utopia. Because in Judaic doomsday myths, the figure of Elijah is supposed to come about. And so, and it'd be really convenient if the guy was named Elijah, so we could just start just testing every person that's named Elijah and be like, hey, can you perform some miracles and shit? Cool. Are you going to have that actual spirit, science of salvation? And the Buddhists are looking for a dude known as Mataya, who's referred to as just a kind of like a good friend who knows what's up and shares the knowledge with you, like as dumbed down of an idea that is. But there's a big difference between a true doomsday messenger versus a friend saying, hey, fuck all this strife and stuff, I got it figured out, this is how we reach enlightenment.
Obviously they're smoking weed at the time, right?
Yeah, right. Just
Yeah.
One of the things that one of the few last things that Bramley brings up in this chapter is predestiny, and he poses a question and along with the apocalyptic prophecies.
Yeah, but not the predestination of Calvinism.
No,
just the idea that things are predetermined generally, and particularly in reference to like the doomsday.
Right. Speaking of like. There's this predestiny, and then he mentioned universalism. Also, kind of, there's like two variations of those kind of descriptions or definitions that, they have to go into context with what we're talking about here.
So this version of predestiny would be like how Daniel explained, sort of the idea that everything's
there's a fixed
set
future.
Out there
there's a fixed outcome
writ large, as opposed to the one that we find later on through Calvinism, which is basically down to like the smallest detail or whatever. Each person is individually, their life is mapped out or whatever, and there's nothing they can do about it.
So
I think that's.
Well, let me read it directly from the book here. It says, predestiny is the idea that the future is already created and unalterable, and that some people have a great special ability to see that future. And says, he asks, does predestiny exist? And basically, he breaks it down like this. He says, part one, he says, find a time and place.
Fucking thought exercise is so stupid.
Find a time and place.
Dude,
it's very simplified the way he does it.
Yeah.
It's so
find a time and
oversimplified.
place and note the time and calculate what time it will be exactly 30 seconds. Now decide exactly where you will be standing when that 30-second moment arrives, and watch the clock and be sure that you're standing in the spot that you choose. You have just created a prophecy and fulfilled it.
It's like a toddler trying to explain calculus here.
Part 2. Look at the clock again and decide on a new location. 10 seconds before the 30-second moment arrives. Rethink where you want to fulfill the prophecy. And if you do, be at that place you decided upon. If you do not, choose a new location at random and be there when the 30-second moment arrives. And repeat the above exercise several times.
So I think that particular form of predestiny is the Calvinist interpretation. I don't know.
Well, I think
very
it gets
specific
a bit
and
more
oversimplified.
It gets a bit more gloomy in the Calvinist type.
Like Calvinism.
Yeah,
like that fucking shit is depressing.
Just the last bit of this chapter talks about prophecy. And he says prophecy has really only one value, and as a tool to either change or ensure the future. And the problem with a seer who foresees a tragic event which later comes true is that he or she divined insufficient information to do anything about it. And then he mentions Edgar Casey, if you're all familiar with Edgar Casey.
Yeah, and like would have been fucking cool if Bramley had waited, till like 2000 to publish this book, so you can be like, hey, Edgar Casey? Yeah, he's fucking wrong. That shit didn't happen.
Anything else to add for this chapter?
Yes. One quick thing, because Bramley took a moment to go, hey, one important thing to remember is because we're getting back into the Machiavelli stuff and the Machiavellian nature of a lot of these groups that we're going to be talking about in later chapters, the Masons and the Stewarts and all these other assholes.
Right.
But to quote Bramley, Old Testament prophets express another important idea. Jehovah would continue to manipulate people into war.
Right.
And then they quote the book of Zechariah, for I, God, will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. Then the Lord shall go forth and fight against those nations. Then jumping down to the book of Haggai, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. And I will overthrow the throne of kingdoms, and I will destroy the strength of the heathen, and I will overthrow the chariots and those that ride in them, and the horses and the riders shall come down, everyone by the sword of his brother. So, going back to the idea that, these gods are, creations of, custodians, and then
they're
perpetuated by Brotherhood activities that, once again, this God in these kind of like doomsday scenarios, as far as the Hebrew faith goes, he straight up admits, like, I'm going to fucking pit you guys against each other. And, it's fucking wild, just like right there in the book. And, you think that like someone back in the day, they'd probably been stoned for heresy or whatever, but just like, wait a minute, God wants us to fight and he's going to make it happen no matter, wait, what?
Bramley does make an interesting distinction that we'll go into later about how that isn't the natural state of humanity. To be in conflict. That's something that's introduced by the custodial influence and the corrupted Brotherhood, playing Machiavelli with cultures and with civilization sort of thing. But yeah, I think the last interesting thing or whatever was how he goes into talking about the next chapter, because he ends it on here about how Jesus was trying to avoid being declared an apocalyptic Messiah, right? And how he was unsuccessful due to, the Brotherhood coming in and
to mention that they nailed him to a cross. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. In this corner, standing 9 to 12 feet tall, depending on what the Romans picked that day, from the sticks, the Essene from Nazarene. Or from Nazareth, I guess, or the Essene Nazarene. There you go. Jesus Christo. Chapter 12. The Jesus Ministry. It's fucking stupid.
Jesus Christ, as most of us, most people.
Wait, we're in the West. We can skip this chapter. We know about it.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. I was going to start that off.
We just had Easter, man. We know this. Like the bunny, right?
Yeah,
You got this.
most
You got
people know
this.
who Jesus is in some form or fashion. He's a white man with beautiful brown hair.
Also funny.
A nice brown beard.
Red hair, right?
Red.
He was because of the.
You could say like depending on red hair, brown hair. I
yeah.
don't know, but it's pretty good. He has some sweet abs. But yeah, so
Yeah, he's
Life's
definitely
getting
he's definitely
nailed by Romans.
he's definitely a white guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Red haired.
I forgot about the part where Bramley
Jesus
mentions
was a
that
ginger.
Jesus either being an Essene, is what you pronounce it?
yeah.
Essene or a Hebrew.
I can't remember what
Oh.
exact like tribe of Israel like David came from or whatever.
That's right,
but
like descendant of David. Like he wouldn't be like a white redheaded person.
No, absolutely not. It's
Because I mean, most I guess
But-
historical things that we read about or see, people show Jesus now, considering
They've
the
been
description that
manipulated.
they give in the Bible as like he's a dark skinned dude with like curly hair and stuff like that. So
right. For the purposes of this explanation, it's a minor detail, but yeah, he wasn't. He wasn't.
okay, so
wasn't a ginger.
there's most the Bible itself has breaks up Jesus's life in between him as a child, like up to like the year of 10 or
He
12.
cherry picks
no,
quite a
no.
bit. Yeah.
He hits about it's like he's a baby, then you see him again when he's like 5 and
Yeah.
then 12, and then he
Right.
disappears until he's 30.
But that's
back as a-
I'm
as
just
a
saying like
30-year-old,
we're getting more occurrences of him as a child, and then
yeah.
then I mean you can't really go into every detail of Jesus' life up to that point. Like they changed his diaper,
Well,
he
it
took a
was
shit this
also-
time, all that kind of stuff. But there were like
was
some
also
I don't know, man.
basically
There's a whole
pulled
book in
from
the
the
Apocrypha
record,
called
right? Yeah,
Infancy,
exactly. He does
so-
mention.
No,
he mentions
I
the
know.
Apocrypha, which
And
but
then the Son of God was burped,
and he had his formula,
and ye who burpeth the Savior is blessed.
Yeah, and then there's a huge gap until he's 30, and then of course, and there's a lot of controversy between the books that describe those parts of Jesus' life because obviously some of those go against the natural order of things for like the Catholic Church. and
right.
stuff
It
like
goes
that.
against the tenets of Christianity, specifically how they talk about how he goes and like meets the gurus in the.
I know there's been some things I read. I think it's Anne Rice's book called Christ the Child or something.
Oh,
And
Christ the King or something like that.
Well,
yeah.
no, it was Christ the King,
Well,
but there's
no,
Christ that
but that was
he's
like
like a kid,
like it was a
small
whole
one.
series or whatever. Yeah, my
Yeah.
mom started reading that.
Yeah,
for a while.
but like it kind of paints Jesus as like a very mischievous kid, like which is.
I think
it's
Anne Rice
interesting.
should have stuck to her perverted vampire series.
Well, there was a point in time where she went back to Catholicism and was like really heavy into it, so she started writing those books.
yeah, big time.
And I remember seeing some instance where I don't even know if it's in the Bible or not, where Jesus gets like the bird, kills it, and then brings it back to life. Like he's already playing with those kinds of magical powers and shit.
that has to
Yeah.
be in the Apocrypha.
I hope it is because I would like to talk about those books, that particular book at some point.
Yeah.
This Bramley has succeeded in doing a couple things. I want to get a copy of the Quran. I want to get the Buddhist legends of Isa, and all this other bullshit, and like a copy of the Apocrypha and the Book of Mormon. Just because it's like, oh man, apparently this shit's a lot crazier than I thought.
Well, yeah, for sure, yeah.
I had forgotten the requirements to be of the Essene
Tribe.
tribe, I guess. Actually, directly relates to his whiteness or whatever.
Yes, it does. According to
That's-
the text of the Apocrypha, and
So-
invoking the Apocrypha, because here we get into some of the spicy stuff, where we have custodial interference in
Do you
human
think
affairs.
this is just like overdone, or rather, very heavy speculation on this point? Because I don't know that. Does he mention in here that, that he's just sort of thinking about it? It doesn't actually. he just says here that the only way he could become a part of this is, he fits this particular category of
Color
features. Yeah, well, the Aryan requirement to becoming in a scene.
Yeah, because they mentioned that he had to be like white. And he had like a red hair and stuff like that. That's why it seemed like a contradiction to him being from the descendant of David.
Right, which they also mentioned that
there's a bunch of things that get problematized. And
well, yeah, that's just one of the
and that
things,
which we'll get there because there's a whole section where Bramley makes a case for Jesus being a member of the Essene community, not whatever tribe David was a part of.
You want to go through? You want to go through a quick recap of Jesus coming to be? So you have like Mary's parents, and then.
But the repeated themes and then
Mary's
getting
parents
into
selling her off
the grander argument that Bramley makes is so details aren't really super important, but here's the brass tacks. So Mary's parents, Joaquin and Anna, apparently were childless. Joaquin gets visited by an angel of the Lord who's like, we got you, homie. And they have Mary. Mary, then, as we're told in the accepted version of the New Testament, gets visited by the angel of the Lord, like, hey, we're going to get that, girl. And she's like, but I've not been with a man. How am I get pregnant? It's like, we got you, boo.
Don't worry about it.
But Bramley takes this and makes this an interesting discussion. I wish he would have potentially explored a little more in depth, but he brings the idea of multi-generational breeding for desired traits, and by means of like artificial insemination. So he likens it to the way that we can produce like badass Hereford, cows and shit. And
it was in vitro.
And so, so his idea is like, multi-generational breedings and the cocks of angels. And you get, kind of the desired byproduct being, Jesus a couple generations later.
He looks exactly like Joseph.
So then
considering that he has like he's supposed to share features of like, I assume whatever the Holy Spirit or Jehovah is supposed to look like. Now, is it an angel impregnating her, or is it supposed to be like Holy Spirit jismum, and then like they take it to her and then like put it in her?
Well, I think that would probably be what Bramley sort of interprets it as when he mentions that artificial insemination stuff.
And we have to always like
but like how magical is it? I guess is what Ray's asking. Like, is it from
by our standards, not at all.
Well, she was like put to sleep, and then like she woke up, and bam, she was with child. Yeah. That just sounds like
just woke up 9 months pregnant. What the
fuck? and I always I wanted to bring up the fact that she is a child in this. She's like 12 or 14 years old. Yeah. And which is, I feel like a fact.
I mean, she ended up pregnant before she even met Joseph.
Yeah, but everyone skips over the fact of putting a number to her, like an age number, because I think most people have it in their heads like she's like a full grown woman.
And Joseph's like an old guy, man.
Like, and he's also got other kids, other families.
He wanted to fucking marry some other broad, and they're like, "Nope, you're marrying this fucking child."
And he's like, "Fine."
Here you go.
I like how Bramley mentioned that Joseph thought that she was a whore because
because he meets this chick and all of a sudden like she's already preggers and he's like, "What? Like, I don't want this. What? This wasn't me. It's impossible. I'm old with my old man balls. Doesn't work."
Bramley brings up the fact that like sex and the way like it's perceived in the religion and stuff like that, it's a sinful deed.
The irony being that
human procreation is not only is like the idea is that human procreation is inherently sinful. Thus, like the angels banging Anna and Mary was a blessing rather than something that fell into the loophole of the trap of original sin. And Bramley takes that even further because he says, well, the idea, if you make the idea of non-procreative sex as sinful,
Right.
then it helps people convince themselves that they can kill other people because they are fucking sinners or whatever.
Right.
And fuck, man, it's just. Then I started thinking about this whole other book that I read in grad school that I wrote about in my notes, and I was like, no, I'm not going to go down the Edward Said hole, like,
it's
because that's fucking crazy.
So we have the fact that trying to convince fact that Bramley is saying that Jesus is part of the Essenes and stuff like that because he was born in a cave. Let me just read this here. Like says when they came by the cave, Mary confessed to Joseph her time giving birth had come, and she could go into the city and said, "Let's go into this cave." And at the time, the sun was nearly down, but Joseph hurried away so that he might fetch her a midwife. And when he saw that an old Hebrew woman was from Jerusalem, he said to her, "Please come here, good woman, and go into that cave, and you will see that a woman is just ready to give birth." And it was after sunset when the old woman and Joseph reached the cave, and they both went into it. And look, it was filled with lights greater than the lights of a lamp and a candle, and greater than the light of the sun itself. And the infant was then wrapped in swaddling clothes and sucking the breast of his mother, Saint Mary. And this is the infancy apocrypha quote here. He talks about the lights and stuff like that, and they're always like mentioning. We forget to mention that the Star of Bethlehem and the wise men, that they were following these lights, the star, and they're saying it was probably a comet or
right.
What were the lights?
Yeah, but that gets like shot down by Bramley all the ways because like, it might be Halley's Comet, but Halley's Comet has never
making a low pass
been like on that path or as bright as it was claimed to be or whatever. So Bramley suggests that it might have been a UFO. And
he's going to continue to suggest
were
throughout the
like agents of the Brotherhood, or they're influenced by the Brotherhood because they're from the East. And so they were potentially practitioners of Zoroastrianism and other forms of Arianism, trying to seek out, this. I don't know. Like it's kind of a weird thing that like Bramley invokes like Zoroastrianism and like why these dudes would show up.
Custodial angels.
But the wise men were just dudes, like. And I don't remember why, like, they thought they should go there. Apart from, like, the New Testament lore of, like, the Messiah.
Yeah, and there's going to be a bright star in the sky that is going to let people know that the Messiah is born. So, I mean, most people were heavily bought into this folklore or...
Oh, right. And then so they are generally said to have been mystics and astrologers.
Yeah. So, like, if a star is like guiding you, those are like mystics and stuff like that. So,
Brotherhood, Messiah.
These aren't just some random guys who saw the star in the sky.
Messiah prophecies.
But sliding away from that, back to the proposed cave birth for Jesus versus the manger story, and we're about to start trying to lean into some of the whirlwind of arguments that Bramley makes about. Jesus being an Essene from his birth. Evidently, caves were popular spots for the Essene community to utilize for a myriad of reasons.
Right.
And then going into like the Jesus missing years, evidently it was a tradition for boys to be sent from the age of like 5-ish off for schooling. And then so that's supposed to account, according to Bramley, for like that section of years for Jesus's life not being recorded. Then he shows back up at the age of 12 because he's preparing for his bar mitzvah. And then that's when we get the famous, he goes to the temple and starts debating, the rabbis there and so forth. And then he goes poof again. And so now I think we're ready to try to lean into what was Jesus supposed to be up to, according to Bramley and other legends.
Popular idea amongst Christians in general is that, and he says it here, is that basically he was a carpenter and he was just
he was just working for his dad.
He was just learning the woodworking with his pops.
Stepdad.
His stepdad.
You're not my dad.
Dude, the whole time I imagine a petulant Jesus. You're not my real dad. My dad can hit you down with a lightning strike
No, he's
or a
just throwing
plague.
some kind of like hammer or some shit like that. Like that's all you got, Joseph.
Jesus, go to your room.
Well, then maybe he invoked those magical powers of his. Like he kills a bird. He's like, you see this, Dad? And like kills it. And like, you're lucky I can bring him back to life. You know, like maybe I won't do that to you, Dad.
Yeah. Like,
who knows if my powers don't work on humans? Huh, Joseph?
Which one's your favorite actual biological
theory?
child, Dad?
be ashamed
fuck
if something
them up,
happened to something happened to you, Papa.
Yeah, Jesus could have been even more metal and just like turn all the furniture back into trees.
All this work, we won't get paid. Tough shit, Dad.
Guess should have let me get that SNES, huh, Joseph?
So you mentioned the legend of Isa. Again, we're talking what
Buddhist,
happened during Jesus'
Buddhist legend.
teen years up until like his 30th year. What was he doing at that time? And there's a legend is it a Buddhist legend, right?
Yeah, it's a Buddhist legend. Yeah.
And
So it supposedly parallels the life of Jesus, and so they led to they made the connection that Isa was in fact
Jesus,
Le Cristo.
Yeah.
Roll, you got the book cracked open right there, and I didn't take great notes on like what Isa was supposed to be all up to, but could you maybe just run us through because first he didn't end up in Buddhist land initially.
No, I mean he was sent. He traveled to Asia under the Essene sponsorship. So like you mentioned before, this was a part of his schooling. If it says here, if the Essenes indeed followed an Aryan tradition, you'd expect Jesus to be sent to study under the Aryan Brahmins of the Indian subcontinent. And according to the legend of Isa, that's precisely what happened. Here we go. In his 14th year, young Isa, the Blessed One, came this side of the Sindh, a province in western Pakistan, and settled among the Aryans. And I mean, once he was there, they welcomed him and brought him in, and started teaching him the Vedas and Hindu scripture. But eventually, he did the same thing he did.
Jesus, the fucking ever loving rebel.
Yeah.
He
Jesus,
he didn't jive with the Hindu caste system.
Fuck.
So he'd be out there trying to hang out with the untouchables and shit, and and give them the gospels or whatever. And the poobahs were like, we don't do that around here.
Yeah.
No.
And Jesus was like, well, why not, dudes? Like, it makes no sense. Get out.
Yeah, exactly.
Get out.
Yeah.
So Jesus gets kicked out of India. I think he gets kicked out of India because he ends up hanging out with the Buddhists.
Apparently, they were so pissed off that they said they tried to have Jesus murdered. And he fled by night and escaped into the sticks or whatever, the Buddhist country. But though he continued to study the sutras, the Buddhist writings. And after 6 years, Jesus could perfectly expound the sacred Buddhist scrolls. Or rather, Isa could do this. It says here that this legend portrays Jesus as a sincere religious reformer who found himself turning against the custodial / Aryan traditions in which he had been raised. These sympathies went instead to the maverick Buddhists. Go ahead.
Neat point in there is that Bramley identifies there's some striking similarities between the Sermon on the Mount and certain Buddhist teachings. Specifically, it'd be the thing was like the Sermon of the Flower. The Buddha was supposed to have given to his disciples at one point. And you have a lot of the same themes popping up, and it's cool shit. But after
he adopts it as the Sermon of the Mount, Sermon on the Mount, excuse me, from that. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. After that, let's see. After 15 years or so in and about Asia, Jesus traveled to Palestine via Persia, Greece, and Egypt. According to one tradition, which doesn't get cited.
No.
Why would it?
Jesus, and this is an important because this is like Bramley's selective citing. Because
how dare you question Bramley's research, Daniel? How?
According to one tradition, Jesus was initiated into the higher ranks of the Brotherhood in the Egyptian city of Heliopolis. Like, what?
Yeah.
And there's nothing. Like, he spends 30 pages talking about the legend of Isa and shit. And then here's this incredible thing where apparently Jesus became a fucking high-ranking member of the Brotherhood.
He just goes anywhere and they just accept him in or whatever. It's just, sure, okay.
He's just that dude, man. Like, everyone wants a part of him.
Everyone wants to hang out with him. He gets along with everybody.
He's a cool dude, man.
But really, like, according to what tradition? And this is what infuriates me about Bramley, because he does like some great scholarship in a lot of ways, but then in other cases, it's completely slipshod.
Well, I mean, there's a part where he mentions Bramley. He says, there is good biblical and apocryphal evidence that Jesus tried to mix the custodial dogma with maverick tenets. And this will cause an honest attempt at spiritual reform. He said, and it failed. So, again, he said there's evidence, but...
Right, because they went ahead. He failed because they went ahead.
Because he could have given us, just because he's great about citing the Bible all over the place, except when it doesn't work.
Right. So...
And it really sucks though, because William Bramley's still alive, and he might stumble upon this series of podcasts, and we might be in some trouble.
Somebody needs to send him a slide into those Twitter DMs. Bramley, what do you think?
Well, I don't even know if he's on Twitter, like, because he has almost no, as we discussed like on our first episode.
He probably has
no
a dot matrix printer, dude.
Except he's a contributor on Ancient Aliens. So I guess we need to like hit up Sukalos and be hey, can you guys Bill Bramley? And
he seems like the kind of person to still like run on like Windows 95 with a 56K
that's fine. We'll send them a Telegram. They exist.
Oh yeah.
Western Union. Dear Bill Bramley, stop.
So
what's up with books?
Anything else to add to this chapter as far as
I just wanted to mention how we were talking about before, that Jesus was trying to mix the maverick and custodial tenets and failed, and avoiding while he was trying to avoid any association to messianic figures, or rather,
or being proclaimed as the Messiah, and
himself. And so the custodials went ahead and did it anyway. They just said, "Oh no, you're the Messiah," and that's it. Like,
now this was before or after he died?
No, this was before.
Okay, I'm just asking.
So Jesus was trying to avoid all of this. He was trying to avoid becoming like the messianic figurehead that they wanted. I think the Essenes refer to it as, or rather, Bramley refers to it as the Essenes wanted a return on their investment, because they were very much a brotherhood. I guess. Did
they want like payment because Jesus skipped out on the bill of tuition or something?
Of a sort, yeah. I mean, that was why. Because sneaky, clever guys went around him and just used, I guess like the PR of the times, and said, no, yeah, like he's the Lord on earth, and that was pretty much the beginning of the end at that point, because then that's when the Romans and the Hebrew leaders came and were like, we don't like you, and tossed him in jail.
Also, another thing that Bramley points to try to positively identify Jesus as an Essene is that he only talks smack about the Pharisees and Sadducees, but not the Essenes and whatever hypocrisies they may be up to. So maybe by his whole like, oh, well, he didn't bring up the Essenes, so maybe, you know. Maybe
well, we can't know that for sure, can we? So
no, of course not. This is Bramley, dude.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Sorry. I just wanted to make that clear for anyone listening. No, I think that about covers it. The basically Jesus' lost years, as you have it written here in our outline here, is the Legend of Isa, which I mean it's pretty damn interesting. I really would like to get get some time spent looking and reading bits and pieces of the apocrypha at some point.
Okay, it says the successful effort to make Jesus the figurehead of a new Judgment Day religion brought about the most famous apocalyptic writing in the Western world, the Revelation of St. John. This work, which is also known as the Book of Revelation or Apocalypse, is the last book of the New Testament, and it leaves Christians with the same type of dire prophecy that the Hebrews had left with the end of the Old Testament. The coming of the great global catastrophe, followed by a day of judgment, the Book of Revelation is well worth taking a closer look at.
Yeah,
no
shit. He says that, but most people, anyone that's flipped through the Bible will probably say that Revelations is where they spent most of their time. It's written completely different from the rest of the Bible. It's kind of the Action Jackson.
And that's a good point that we'll bring up in the next chapter. Roland, can you introduce us to the next chapter?
Sure. Chapter 13 is titled The Apocalypse of John.
Okay, so we have the alleged author is supposed to be St. John, which is supposed to be the disciple of John.
Jesus, yeah.
Also the writer of
not to be confused with John the Baptist.
Yeah. A different John.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. We got it. Because we're stupid.
The Book of Revelation is probably, again, I've mentioned before, probably one of the most interesting parts of the Bible because it's pretty violent, it's bloody. There's monsters in there. There's like all this. There's the huge
plagues, the
angels battling
rapture,
fucking demons, and all this other kind of shit. There's animals with fucking like 7 heads and scrolls being opened up, skies turning to blood. It's pretty crazy. But one of the things that they bring up, and again, this is jumping ahead into this chapter, is that the writing seems different from the Book of John, which is supposed to be the gospel.
Seems a lot more modern.
This one.
Like a much more like modern format of writing. It's because it's very easy to read. Like unlike the rest of the Bible, that's just sort of teachings and stories. This one's more of a fictional narrative. It's.
Well, I mean, fictional, Roland. It's true. Let's be real here. That's
no. I'm not saying that.
We just had Easter. You're going to blaspheme like that?
Yeah. I meant in like a fictional narrative as like a fiction novel or whatever. They're very easy to read and to sort of like they have a particular flow.
Well, it's one question is why Bramley brings up the fact that and it's not even just Bramley bringing it up. I mean, most people question the authorship of most books of the Bible.
There's a serious question of the authorship of like the Book of Revelation.
Yeah, and not even just that book, of most books. I mean, claiming like even the five books of the Bible
years after the fact, generally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
I know that most folks have questioned the fact of the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, are even written by Moses because, again, who the fuck knows if he actually wrote them or not?
Yeah, and I mean, just the easiest distinction I can think of would be the differences between the Old and the New Testament. Like, it's like, okay, if they're both true, why are they completely different? Because, and Bramley does go into the specifics of that, I think, a little later.
Right, and one of the things brought up about the Book of Revelation as to how these visions came about was because John was exiled onto the island of Patmos, and I'm not sure exactly the plant life they have there or what kind of architecture or even if they had any
burning
there.
bush, baby.
That there was rituals that allowed rituals that were performed on John that allowed him to see these visions. Or was it just some kind of like drug-induced things? Maybe he was starving. Maybe he was dehydrated. Maybe he was sleepless. All these things could have contributed to the fact that he saw these quote-unquote visions. Here's a quote from Bramley. It says, the question is, what caused the author's visions? Was it lunacy, a propensity to tell tall tales? Because that seemed like his thing so far. Or was it something else? The author seems sincere enough to rule out deceit. His straightforward manner of narration tends to eliminate lunacy as the answer. That leaves something else. The question is what? It's pretty easy. There's not much thought put into something else. That just leaves it up to, I assume, the reader, us, to determine what that could be.
So, I guess if I can, I'd like to just read this one or two sentences here that sort of sums up Revelations and like its particular
Go ahead.
development and context within the Bible here. The book of Revelation is written in a wonderfully picturesque manner. It's filled with complex and imaginative symbolism.
Oh, you're back there again?
Am I? Because the pictures revealed to John were symbols, Revelation can be used to predict an imminent end of the world at almost any historical epoch, which that's what I thought was interesting, because like how we mentioned before that a lot of the apocalyptic religions are, they have cycles. And so I just thought it was interesting here that this is specifically written in a way that it can be applied to any time. So,
well, it mentioned that John, his visions were seemingly of like almost like a cartoonish type of thing, that he could see words on like the seven heads and shit like that, and that they mentioned that something was giving him like the images themselves. And again, it almost seems like, let me find the page here where it says that. Oh, right here. It says the fact that actual words, quote, parentheses, blasphemous names were written upon the heads of the creature revealed that John was looking at an illustration with labels, much like an old-fashioned political cartoon. It says, although the author does not specifically say so, it is likely that many other visions on the scrolls were labeled in a similar fashion. So is he reading like old-timey comic books written by the Custodians? And while he's in some kind of a drug-induced hallucination there, and they're feeding him all these like Adult Swim cartoons and shit
actually,
like that.
I know what John saw now.
And what was that?
They just put the glasses on him from They Live.
Or probably right. There was another thing that they mentioned here too, and I put it in my notes, is John a pussy? And that was because there's a point here where it says in the above passage from Revelation, and that's where he has the quote here. I'm not going to read it though. Let's see here. So the above passage of Revelation, we observe that John reacted with strong emotions to what was going on around him. He was especially prone to weeping on relatively little provocation, and he seemed unable to distinguish between ritual and apparent reality. And this raises the question about his mental state.
And I'm kind of curious. So, talking about like the ritual that was supposed to be going on, I brought up my notes. It's not going to be a surprise to you guys, but on page 139, fucking Bramley talks about how John was taken up into, the heavens or whatever. But he basically breaks it down to where it's like, if you just ask somebody modern day what they would see, like, I was taken to a spacecraft. I saw people in their spacesuits and there seemed to be a radio, bullshit thing. But then he goes to talk about, but the presence of seven lamps and seven candles indicates that there's some sort of ritual set up. It's like, well, what's the modern day correlate of that, fucking Bramley? You're so fucking smart, but he just goes, okay, but now like here I, modernize it. And now, back to the ritual. But it's just like, just jarring jump of logic where it was just really kind of hard to follow. And I kept trying to like reread that over and over and go like, this makes sense, right? No, it doesn't. At least to me. Like,
yeah,
it was one of those like, Bramley trust me moments.
There are a lot of those.
Yeah, like we've mentioned before.
This book could be called, The Gods of Trust Me.
It's that snake from fucking Jungle
subtitle.
Book,
I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so like the Apocalypse of John, the Book of Revelations, we don't really know exactly what caused, or if anything, maybe was this his own doing? Was this him praying so hard that these things were revealed to him? But I mean, we can easily, I can feel I can confidently say that he was under some kind of mental duress And he probably ate like a mushroom or something around there that was a little bit funny.
Yep.
And visions go on ahead, you know. I mean,
okay, so
I know people
but
people talk about like the burning bush with Moses and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and that how that probably had some kind of psychedelic chemicals as well. So he's hearing voices. He's seen a fucking burning bush on top of that. So I mean, who knows?
Breathe deep.
my alternative hypothesis is that, say this is, the Saint John, the disciple, he's in exile. Maybe he's just really fucking bored.
Yeah.
Like, well, what
Then
if?
then he's a pretty damn good writer and has one hell of an imagination, because shit, to pull all this out of nowhere, out of thin air.
I mean,
Yeah,
just like George Lucas. Oh wait, that's not accurate. He just took from most of stuff.
Okay, so I mean, anything else to add about the Apocalypse of John? I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I don't really feel that there was much to it. I mean, what's John? Where's he getting these visions from? Who did he? Is he the same John from the Gospels?
They do mention that, like, John was offered a scroll. Here we go. Went to the angel and said to him, "Give me the little scroll." And he said to me, "Take it and eat it up, and it will make your belly bitter, but
It's acid, bro. That's acid.
That's
be
what
in
I
your
wanted to
mouth
ask
as
about.
sweet
All
as
right,
honey."
so
That's acid,
let's be
man.
real, guys. All right, what if we taken as sweet to the taste and then bitter to the belly? Because I'm not sure what the fuck that means. I mean, I haven't danced with like heavy psychedelics or whatever, but like, does acid like do that? Like, does
I
it
don't
fuck with
think
your
acid.
system?
I don't think
Like,
acid has any sort
Maybe
of
if you have
taste.
some
It's
bad
just,
acid, I'd be worried.
Yeah, I'm just like going like, okay, but
I mean,
like,
that's-
because this is another like Bramley trust me moments, because it's like, oh, this means it's a hallucinogen.
Well, remember-
but this sounds like somebody who talks about like injecting marijuana.
you know,
taking some
like
shroomy
he's, I
shrooms
mean,
dipped in
normally
honey.
what like acid is on a little like paper tag, like little.
Yeah, no, and that's what Bramley's trying to get to. But the whole thing, he was like coming back and like, 'cause he brings it up like 2 or 3 times about how it's significant that it's sweet to the tongue and bitter to the belly, so it's drugs.
Yeah.
But then he doesn't like even go into Bramley, like, oh, this could have been, some, whatever. He was like, oh, it must be drugs. It's got to be drugs. I've heard
Well,
drugs
he
do bad
says in
things.
here
gotta be
that
It's like
once he eats this, he magically came to know, posits it as a document, right? And once he eats this sheet of paper or whatever, he absorbs this knowledge instantly.
I mean, this is like Mothers Against Drunk Drivers like level rhetoric.
Here's the
It
thing, like you
sounds
just
like.
mentioned, Ray. Acid tabs are on paper, so and he.
But
doesn't
he
even-
took a
even
whole
writes in
scroll,
here,
Roland.
the clues probably
Yeah,
paper
he had
or
a
something
whole
else.
scroll. Like,
Saturated, yeah,
You don't get the 7 head dragons without a scroll, my friend. Like,
without a shitload,
but also,
a sheet of acid.
but I guess to tie this back, because for further cases or instances where you've got angels that are potentially drugging people, he goes back to Ezekiel.
To Ezekiel.
And his little sky trip as well for that. Because there's also reference to eat this, sweet to taste, bitter to the belly. Whatever that's supposed to mean. Yeah, I just had to wonder, like, it just sounded like somebody who's heard that drugs are a thing that people take is describing what drugs do. Like,
Strong drugs.
Chapter 14, the Plagues of Justinian. Christianity is spreading around whatever part of the world it is at this particular time. There's Christian crimes, so to speak, that result. Excommunication being like one of the ones that's the most
severe.
Most extreme.
yeah.
Because without a religion, there is no chance for salvation, and you are damned.
But we see a lot of changes to Christianity happening around this time. So this is when you hear we get reintroduced to, or maybe the reader is first introduced to the character of Constantine, who was emperor of the Byzantium Empire for a while. And he, the lore goes basically whatever, doesn't really matter, but he gets in his head that no, they need to be a Christian, country.
Right.
He was trying to drive them towards a monotheistic belief system. Yeah.
So, but within this, there's some very important things that Constantine does, and then he starts the trend, and then it's carried out by other figures, ending in, or at least in this part of the story, ending with Justinian. But we have the first Council of Nicaea, 532 AD, I believe it was. Then you have the Second Synod. But basically, there's just little things that start getting snipped out of the Bible, books where authorship is really questionable. Mentions of reincarnation, which was apparently a very important idea to Jesus and his early followers.
Right. And that was struck from the...
But most importantly, you start getting the worst you can get it was excommunicated back in the day. But now new crimes came about, heresy and paganism.
Yeah.
And instead of just, oh, hey, let's just kick them out. No, these were like death penalty crimes now.
Yep.
This is what happens when religion goes political,
right. Well,
but also importantly,
even before Constantine,
a lot of things that happened to the world because of Constantine and Justinian's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Because you get the foundations for feudalism with Constantine's kind of blind obedience, blind faith rather than faith by reason. You get the idea of kind of almost like social castes being implemented into the Roman Empire, where if you're a peasant, you're born a peasant, die a peasant.
Right. One of the things I did want to bring up was the reason, the vision Constantine had regarding Jesus. Said, let me just read it here. In fact, about the time of the day when the sun, having passed its meridian, began to decline towards the west, he saw a pillar of light in the form of a cross on which he was inscribed the conqueror. The appearance of the sign struck him with amazement, and doubting his own eyes, he asked those around him if they could see what he did, and as unanimously declared that they could. And the emperor's mind was strengthened by the divine and miraculous apparition. On the following night, while he slept, he saw Christ, who directed him to make a standard flag according to the pattern he had been shown, and to use it against his enemies as a guarantee of victory. Obedient to the divine command, he had a standard flag made in the form of a cross, and which he preserved in the palace until this day. So, I mean, I had heard somewhat of the story where he was in battle, and then he ended up
had that vision.
Yeah, and then everyone else saw it too or something. So you think if he had asked his subordinates if they had seen this as well, and they said no, being the person that he was introducing these new Christian crimes, that he wasn't opposed to doing something to them.
Who began introducing these new crimes.
Yeah.
So he was probably a rotten son of a bitch before
the
revelation of Christianity.
So they're going to just go along with what he says.
Yeah, we saw that, sire.
I don't think it would have made a difference.
It's a cigar shape. What's a cigar? Oh, don't worry about it. We'll get there in a few years.
Constantine, the guy was already pushing towards incorporating these Christianity's ideals into his own.
Because wasn't there a little bit in this chapter where it was he was trying to kind of promote the type of monotheism that Akhenaten was trying to promote in Egypt?
His father was a monotheist, and so he was trying to find something to legitimize that form of belief, because the irony in Christianity is that before Constantine came along and gave them sort of the state backing.
He was persecuting Christians at this point, right?
Yeah, they were the Christians for the first 300 years. They were highly persecuted until Constantine, and then they turned around and started fucking everyone else up. So
you think the Christian right has something to whine about today? Let's get another Constantine out, or an anti-Constantine.
Now it's our turn to give you the whooping. Assume the position. They didn't learn from it. But that sort of goes back to the custodial influence or whatever that they they promote and support the infighting of all cultures, and so this just falls into that that plan.
So after Constantine and his methods, we have the Emperor Justinian coming into play, and he
further, helped dial Catholicism up to 11.
Right? Didn't he outlaw other? Was he
it
the
says
one that outlawed other
under
religions?
Justinian, the hunting of heretics became a frequent activity, and the practice of burning heretics at the stake began. So I did like what you had put there in your notes, Daniel.
I'll call him Heretic Hunter. Yeah.
Yeah, the rise of Justinian, the heretic hunter. Yeah. That was a good one.
So let's get to the subject matter, like the actual meat of this. There's a little historical background. We're gonna have a little bit more of it, because we're gonna talk about the history of plague a little bit. But the plagues of Justinian. So circa 540 to 592 Common Era, bubonic plague hits Europe. They end up calling it Justinian's plague because it actually started in his domain,
in his rule,
and was fucking awful. And it was thought that it was a punishment from gods. Apparently, the word plague is from the Latin meaning wound or blow. So a blow from God, a wound from God,
right?
And we get into a fun little history of plague because he goes into like bubonic versus pneumonic plague. But who wants to get into the fun shit where it's, the association of aerial phenomenon and plague?
The like the direct association or influence of the custodians.
Are you talking about the part where there was like strange sights reported in the sky?
Right. They mentioned that. So the reason Bramley writes, I think, about those two types of plague is to just sort of explain, their origins. But then he goes into what, he explains that this, there was
some of the weirdness of the timings of
right,
the plague. Is that what you're going to try to get to? Because when it comes to bubonic plague, apparently it's not supposed to be passable from person to person.
Right. It can't. It can only be transferred from an animal to a person. It can't be transferred.
The pneumonic is more aerial. Like you can.
Right. Yeah. And so the pneumonic is where he brings in the sightings of the comets because it's fatal. I think for the bubonic plague, they're actually, there are ways for them to survive it, but the pneumonic is mostly fatal.
Don't they go deeper into that into the Black Death chapter?
Right.
Daniel, are you referring to like the part like towards the end of this chapter where it says the one reason people thought the plague to be from God was the frequent appearance of unusual aerial phenomenon in the conjunction with outbreaks of the plague?
Yes.
One chronicler.
I fucked up because I was jumping ahead a little bit because I forgot about the Black Death chapter coming up.
Yeah.
So I conflated them a little bit. My apologies.
That's all right.
Okay.
Let me
like a bit of
with
an
this
early
one here because like this is pretty much the end of the chapter. This last part. So it says one chronicler of the Justinian plague was a famous historian, Gregory of Tours, who documented a number of unusual events from the plague years. Gregory reports that just before Justinian's plague invaded the, I don't know how to pronounce that, region of France in 567 AD, 3 or 4 brilliant lights appeared around the sun, and the heavens appeared to be on fire. And he says, I don't know what the sundog effect is. I've never heard of that personally.
I don't either. And
it says, another unusual celestial phenomenon were also seen in the area. Another historian reported a similar event 23 years later in another part of France. Strange sights were reported in the sky and the ground was sometimes sometimes are brilliantly illuminated at the sky as in the day. And then shortly after that, disastrous outbreak of the plague occurred.
I thought it was aubergine.
I'm not too sure how to pronounce that.
It doesn't matter.
But they mentioned that there was an immense dragon which floated through the city and down to the sea, followed by a severe outbreak of the plague immediately afterwards.
No, I think Auvergne is the first one on page 149.
Yes, that was the one.
Avignon is
the later
because that's where the the second pope, the anti-pope or whatever was housed at. So this chapter, I'm not sure why he just didn't, take this chapter and take the Black Death and just put them together, because the stuff that he's talking that we just referenced about, like the strange sightings and so forth, comes right back. He talks about directly what happened at Avignon, like what was at play, But it's just, but once again, the convenient plot armor of, well, stuff mentioned early may not make sense now, but it will later, and vice versa.
I think Bramley, he mentions that he takes, the way he goes through these chapters chronologically is that this is apparently happening at the same time that this is happening in France. So he's trying to put everything in a chronological sense. But again, that would benefit just to mention that other Black Death stuff right at the same time as he's mentioning this, because it's literally the same thing. Yeah. So, but yeah. Was there any other part to this?
It could have been like
it's a short chapter.
Plagues of Justinian and beyond, but that's all I have for that chapter.
So the next chapter is chapter 15, Mohammed. Now, the only thing I have in here is Mohammed is the Islam dude. I wasn't too fond of this chapter because I feel like he went Bramley went even further than he had to go, personally, to get his point across. It's titled as Mohammed, so you think it may be just Mohammed, but he kind of goes
but then he brings in the fucking Crusades.
Yeah, the Crusades, the Templar, the Teutonic Knights, the Knight Hospitaller. Which was funny because it just says that those were they operated a hospital in Jerusalem.
Yeah, right. Then they became like
the Knights of Saint. Was it John?
Knights of Saint John, Hospitallers or whatever, when they became militarized during the Crusades. And
here it brings in
in this chapter we start talking about we start getting introduced to some of these knight organizations which get reformulated later in
right. Talk the Templars, the Teutonic Knights, and the Knight Hospitaller.
Yeah. So, but before all that, he does mention talks about Muhammad a little bit and how he came about, and how he received his visions also in a cave, and it was triggered by an apparition. He saw a ghost, and this is the thing that gave him his revelation, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Another Life of the Messiah stuff. Yeah.
And I didn't know this. Islam, I knew it at the time that I did read this, but I forgot it. Where Islam means surrender, and that his followers are surrendered to God, and that's why they're called Muslims. And Muslim means one who submits. And Islam is more custodial religion designed to instill abject obedience in humans. Now, it seems like it went even further with trying to instill that obedience in their subjects. Because, Jesus seemed to have tried to break away from that. So there's the conflict there between those who just are following the obedience. Yeah.
And I'm not a student of Islam, but
neither are
I would not be surprised if the Quran went through a series of edits similar to what the New Testament went through, to fit the fucking narrative, of the Shahs and so forth.
Right, and it seems that Islam was even more strict than the Christianity attempted to be. And you see it now with certain conflicts of the religion. You have I guess those who claim it to be peaceful, just like Christianity, same thing. And then there's kind of those middle ground people, and then there's the extremists, and there are Christian extremists
and
as well.
Of that comes down to kind of like you having some issues with or within Hebrew communities, as far as descendants of whom or whatever. Mm-hmm. I believe some of the Shia or Shia and Sunni split was who actually was in the line of Muhammad or what have you. And I think it's fascinating. And I think that there had to have been series of edits to the Quran for political gains because, what is the caliphate? He's supposed to be the, fucking, spiritual or direct, ancestor of fucking Muhammad. Oh.
Right, and it's kind of like goes along the line of the Zoroaster that we talked about earlier, like the succession of savior or like messiahs that come through. So we had like Jesus, now we have Muhammad, and again,
right, and the Quran does acknowledge Jesus and some of the other
and
Old
Moses
Testament prophets
and
as like
Abraham
great teachers or whatever, like they're on the path or whatever. But like Islam is like the end all be all to these religions, or at least that's how Bramley kind of poses it. But
well, yeah, because I mean,
as it is, I don't know.
Technically, like Islam is the last incarnation of the religion. Abrahamic religions. So I mean, I guess that would be the end all be all in that case, because this is the last incarnation that has come through.
Jesus was a prophet, and respected kind of like teacher, whatever. So it's fascinating how things have gotten, subverted from the alleged initial intent of what Islam was supposed to be to the extremism and stuff we have. But, that.
But you get into like the violent aspects of Islam. Just we're going to read it right here. It says, Muhammad honored Moses and Jesus as Allah's two previous messengers and proclaimed Islam to be the third and final revelation from God, like we just mentioned earlier. It was therefore the duty of all Jews and Christians to convert to Islam. So,
yes,
again, which is, that's where we start getting into some shady shit right there. The Hebrews and Christians tended to be less than cooperative with Muhammad's demand. And after that's slightly said, right?
Bramley does write pretty funny sometimes. Like just
says, after all, they had been warned in their own apocalyptic writings about the dangers of false prophets, and the result has been some of the bloodiest fighting in world history. So, I mean, like they pretty much, again, to continue with the whole war aspect of this book, and constant fighting amongst the humans, they fuck themselves by adding that little clause, is that there's going to be people coming around claiming to be the Messiah, so you should not believe them. And then the next person comes around and says they're the Messiah, so you need to convert to us. But they're like, well, we can't because we think you're a false prophet. No, die. And then it just goes on from there. So, but one of the it says right here, it says, like so many custodial religions before it, Islam did not allow people the luxury of choosing whether or not to become adherents. Muhammad embarked on a program of conquest to make it clear which way the choice was to go, using the taxes as a generalissimo. The divinely inspired Muhammad raised an army and set off to convert unfaithful ones, also known as infidels, to his faith. Yeah. So that's where all this starts to, all these wars and shit, the Crusades, all this nonsense just starts popping up, and then the wars ensue.
More of it starts popping up.
After this, it kind of I lose it because I mean, there's a lot of names being dropped and stuff about who's fighting who, but sure, everybody's fighting.
But we have some important things that happen.
Yeah.
You've got the creation of the Knights of Malta and the Knights Templars that became known. They have their earlier names, they have their changes, when they had to get kicked out of countries or whatever. But you have these groups that are being established, and particularly the Knights Templar, associated with Freemasonry, is going to become very relevant later.
Right.
But you also have the rise of the Assassins, which are kind of like a Knights Templar, but of Islam, which is fascinating. And this is when, the idea of the lone assassin gets implemented into political theater, I guess. So the lone assassin, that gets, has implications later on. So that's something important to bring up. Then you also have the creation of the Dominican and Franciscan orders by the Catholic Church. The Franciscans, kind of the silly ass Friar Tucks that
Also themselves adopting symbolism.
Yeah,
from
the cord of the loins, and then
right.
the bald spot back here.
Apron. Well, no, they didn't. I don't think they had an apron. Did they?
Modeled after Egyptian and
yes.
potentially Mesopotamian priesthood folk. And then you have the Dominican order, which they become the heads of the fucking Inquisition, which kicks off around the Crusades time as well. And then skipping all of the 130 years of bloodshed, we get to the 10-year truce, which is fucking fascinating. Does anyone want to like take that away?
Before we go into that, I sort of wanted to mention just a quick bit about the Assassins sect. That you mentioned, that they bring in the idea of the lone assassin, but aside from that, a lot of their religious system was later sort of adopted and or incorporated into the Templar beliefs, and that was actually has implications for later on with the Freemasons. So they do have quite a bit of significance later on, and it isn't something that's widely known, and I just thought that was really interesting. But yeah, so where is it?
Were you trying to get into the whole convincing convincing these guys to become lone assassins bit?
No. That I thought they'd actually said that was kind of like a myth sort of thing, that like they more than likely operated within small groups as well, and that later on that no. The whole, was adopted.
The way that the assassin order was able to like recruit people,
brainwash these people, and get them to do very ridiculously extreme.
because they're likely assassins they struck out in public so sometimes on themselves or in small groups or whatever, but it's very likely they're going to be captured or killed on the spot.
But they didn't, and the reason that supposedly they were able to put themselves through this is because they believed that when they were killed they would go back to that heaven that apparently that is
so what happened to these dudes is that they'd get approached by the assassin guys, drugged, taken to,
they would take them to a
garden within the Eagle's Nest Fortress of the Assassins, where it's a
this beautiful
fucking bitches and blow.
It's supposed to represent the Garden of Eden sort of thing.
And they get, they have the time of their life, and then they're drugged again, drop where they're off, and they're convinced that they died, went to heaven, came back, and then, so then these assassin guys or assassin leaders are like,
hey, you want another taste?
you want more of that? All right, well here's the job, bud. And
they'll kill the president.
Fuck yeah.
Right. Yeah, and so they were under the impression that even if once they complete their mission and they're destroyed, they would go back to that heaven sort of thing. But it was an interesting form of brainwashing, is what they refer to it as.
Yeah,
or rather,
and
Bramley.
Just bring that up, the idea of ancient brainwashing techniques that may have been employed, because later chapters, next episode, we're going to be getting back into the idea of the lone assassin here and there. So, so more for later. So we're going to Bramley this and be like, okay, but more on that later, guys. Trust us. But
that's the only way to do it, man.
Where does that leave us?
The 10-year truce.
Oh,
which is,
so like I'd mentioned a little bit of that before, was when I was talking about the natural state of humanity not being that of warfare, and that is exactly the example that Bramley uses to suggest.
So the story goes that Frederick II was in trouble with the Pope and was getting ready to become excommunicated. But before that could go down, he said, fuck it, and took himself and
negotiated
a cohort of some folks down to Jerusalem and negotiated a fucking peace treaty with the Muslims. And it was going to run for 10 years. And I believe the terms were that there's going to be no fighting. but the Christians could not arm themselves, I believe. But evidently it
worked very well.
It worked.
And a lot of the warring officials on both sides were pissed as fuck about it because they wanted to kill each other. And this guy came and sort of like swept the rug out from under them, and just, I mean, everything was chill for 10 whole years.
Yeah, and the whole, once again, Brotherhood custodial influence for the fighting is what the Christians and Muslims thought that they were fighting for, which was their spiritual salvation and freedom. My God's dick is bigger than yours.
I think this was around the time that the Knights Templar set up some strongholds within.
Yes, this is where you have like some incipient banking startup in these kind of
within the region, and that was when they started
amassing wealth,
amassing wealth, and then also incorporating influences from the assassin sect into their own organization. Specifically, and this is going to be mentioned later, but the degrees that the Freemasons use, and they had supposedly tried to adopt from the Knights Templar, were themselves specifically taken from the assassins.
Which I don't think Bramley ever clearly demonstrated. I went back through this chapter.
So he mentions later, just like one or two sentences about
he
how...
does, but he goes, but he doesn't mention the blue degrees at all in chapter 15, even though he makes the claim later that the idea for the blue degrees may have come from
he jumps around.
The assassins.
Yeah, it's almost like a minor details. Like, are you fucking kidding? Like that was kind of like one of their main like systems of organization. Their caste system or whatever was sort of based around those degrees, the blue degrees. I think there was like originally 3, and then they upped it to 6. Like, so there was like 3 generalized title, and the degrees are just they're sort of like just job titles sort of thing, because everyone has to go and they have to enroll within this, the boys club or whatever, and then
it's okay, Roland. We're gonna get there. A few more chapters. We can talk all about the blue degrees and the true degrees and speculative versus operative Freemasonry and all this cool stuff I wrote notes about that.
Okay. So, anyways, just leaving off on that.
But we get to the end of this chapter and we get another Bramley italicized moment where he writes that war is the institution of criminality. War can never bring about spiritual improvement because criminality is one of the main causes of spiritual and mental deterioration. Which leads to another cool premise from him.
That's an interesting quote. I liked that.
The biggest problem with using violent force to fight for a cause is that the rules of force operate on completely different principles than do the principles of right and wrong. Where he roughly sums up as like the man with the fastest gun is not necessarily the man with the right ideals.
Sure.
So I wish I read a better transition for this in my notes, but getting into messiahs and means, here we go. Oops. Wait, we're on chapter 15. Sorry, I've got to the wrong chapter. I'm stupid. So Bramley writes that the Crusades and other religious conflicts have often been fueled by the issue of who is a true Messiah and who is not. Passions can run strong on this topic. It therefore behooves us at this time to discuss what a Messiah might or might not be. Chapter 16 Messiahs and Means.
Okay, so what is the definition of a Messiah? It says that someone that brings salvation to, basically a group of people or people in general. And I guess you can determine what salvation means to you regarding that.
He writes here that it has several meanings.
Well, yeah, but I'm just talking about like a general thing. Whenever someone thinks a Messiah, someone to come and save,
like a religious
people.
leader.
Yeah,
right.
Like literal saving. Like they want to come and save them from suffering, damnation, you name it. Yeah, he also calls him like the liberator, teacher. It says Messiah could be anyone from a person who develops a successful science of the spirit to someone who is actually able to spiritually liberate the human race. And we talked about the Buddhist Maitreya, who's kind of like the friend that's going to come and just give you
a quick, few tips on living,
Right.
I got a direct translation if you want to hear it.
Sure, go ahead.
The Hebrew word Mashiach, meaning Messiah, is the one anointed with oil. It's a ritual act designated to elevate those for priestly, royal, or sometimes even prophetic roles. So,
all right. And the Messiah usually has the job of a second coming. There's never just one shot Messiah guy. Like they always got to come back. Let everyone live their lives. They're going to come back, give everyone that good news. And
right, and it just again ties back into those the themes of cycles.
Yeah, the doomsday prophecies, because those the returning is always followed by something even worse. Apocalypse.
What is it? What I think is interesting in this chapter is, it's a short ass chapter, and it could have been expanded quite a bit. I think but
you can say that about every chapter in this book, though.
Yeah, mostly.
Not really.
There are a few.
There's some that run a little long.
Well, I would say about 90% of them can be
girl.
expanded upon regarding the fact that he's making quotes or references and stuff that need to be explained in some certain kind of context, and he's just too lazy to attempt to even really flesh those out.
But this was a big project to begin with,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
To go even further, he probably would never fucking finish this book.
I was actually mentioning to Bryce that this should have been like a series, like fucking the Earth Chronicles, if that's how much he wanted to flesh this out. But he said himself he's not really a writer. He just kind of like took this upon himself, and here you go.
References.
When it kind of comes down to the brass tacks for this chapter, though, and it's interesting because Bramley doesn't go like, oh, here's how we recognize a savior, but the Messiah, the way you fucking recognize them is if they're actually able to bring about that spirit, science of the spirit or the science of salvation or whatever. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter who claims to be what or who is claimed to be what. It's whether they fucking produce results or not.
Right.
But also it's like, but how are we supposed to identify that? Because if it's a science of the spirit or whatever, and it's this new thing or whatever, I don't know.
You think that maybe,
how do we just not kill every fucking new guy? Because
he answers
like even if they have like a legitimate science of the spirit, how do we distinguish between, the teaching is like a false prophet like Jesus versus, the true teachings of Bill the Potter down by the river.
Think about it.
Paraphrasing
any sort of major religion that has a Messiah, that's usually where the focus is. Do you know how many Messiahs come up? Probably like every other week in this fucking world, and they have like mini cults following them. There's probably a shit ton, and in every fucking continent around the world, there's got to be some person who's claiming to be the Messiah, and they have the answers.
Yeah.
Just look at any cult that's come in the past. You have fucking Heaven's Gate, motherfucking Applewhite, and you also have Jim Jones. And usually all these people like bring about their own apocalypse because they have to fulfill it themselves.
Is kind of what explains it. Daniel, you were sort of paraphrasing or clipping parts from that paragraph talking about Liberator prophesized Messiah and how it's identified. Did you mention here how Bramley just writes here? The answer is simple: the would-be liberator must succeed.
Yeah,
and that's pretty much how.
Yeah, like He has to do it.
They have to earn. They have to earn the title. It's God. It's not God given.
But how do we recognize that?
Yeah.
Like,
how does one succeed?
Like, how does humankind like recognize that that's an actual like tried and tested?
They don't. They have to sort of assume that because basically it's the winner who gets to dictate.
Because it just sounds like it's like putting like the cart before the horse sort of thing. Because like the spiritual salvation comes about, and then they are definitely recognized as the Messiah, but the goal's already been achieved. So then, what does it matter if we refer to them as the Messiah because we're already like in that utopia or whatever? I'm not sure if I'm making like a whole lot of sense here, but it just
that is.
It just seems like it's a weird argument that Bramley's making, like that they have to succeed, but if they succeed, then the utopia is there. Then what does it matter?
I don't know that they succeed within a utopia. I think he just means they succeed within being recognized. Because like
no,
the way all of these religions go is that I mean like the utopia would can claim or be proclaimed to be the fucking Messiah. But it's whether or not they succeed in the mission that they actually demonstrate that they are the Messiah. Like I don't think
it's a put up or shut up sort of like situation for Bramley, I think.
I'm not sure he's referring to like the success of the religion because like how it's sort of stated throughout all of these.
Well, it's not
they're never
you can call it religion.
They never get to the final
spirit, the science of the spirit or the science of salvation, however he fucking coins it.
They never reach. None of these religions ever reach.
The lens of Buddhism or the lens of Christianity or whatever.
It's because like when you said utopia, man, to me that's the association of like the end of the religion, and by the very nature of all of these religions, the end is never within reach. It's always like they're striving towards this.
Well, no, but it would be like according to Bramley, it would be attained, like the utopia or whatever, because the liberation of the spirit is the whole fucking, like becoming self-actualized spiritual beings or whatever is what the custodians try to prevent us from doing.
I see. Yeah, you're right, because the prophecies aren't going to be okay.
Yeah. So if the fucking Messiah comes along, does it, then everything should fall into line. And then what does it matter about proclaiming the Messiah after the fact? Like
that is a weird contradiction that he makes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the Messiah's going to come and do his fucking thing and like save us or whatever. Otherwise, it's all bullshit. And don't worry.
Is that really a claim, or is that just an observation he's making amongst all the religions themselves? Like that is one of the flaws that they have is that there is the Messiah coming through, but it's going to end. But if it doesn't, like they need to reach out to utopia to succeed. But since like Jesus, is that the Messiah? He hasn't technically succeeded, so technically he's not a Messiah.
Those people do not satisfy Bramley's definition of a Messiah then.
Yeah, Mohammed either rejected outright or whatever. Like say Mohammed had it right, or say Elijah had it right, or whoever the fuck, or Ezekiel. And, they die in obscurity or get nailed to a cross or whatever. So it just seems like, despite opposition, it's like, right.
So none of them are true messiahs. Then I suppose,
like fucking, I don't know.
Well, see, like even with like the whole Messiah thing is that like we have, I don't know the ending or the death of Muhammad. Was he like taken up into like the heavens like Jesus was whenever he came back from the dead? I don't know this for a fact. Because Jesus was the only one apparently that I know of. Again, I don't know Islam, that he rose on the third day, and then everyone saw him. Then he was taken up into heaven, preferably by a UFO. I don't know if Muhammad, that happened to him in some way or another. Technically, I guess Jesus would have succeeded in some way.
Muhammad's buried, dude.
You see, well, there you go. Like,
he died in June 8th, 632.
But Muhammad isn't considered like a divine figure, though, is he? Like, he's just the last prophet. Jesus wasn't technically, according to them, a divine figure either. He was just a teacher and a prophet. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
like
right.
Muhammad isn't like the
that
son
was
of
sort
God
of later
either.
retconned by Catholicism into the.
All right, guys, let's go get religious studies bachelors, I guess. Fuck. I guess I'll do Islam. Ray, you take Buddhism.
The one even bigger
Roland,
waste of.
Brotherhood, there you go.
What are you gonna throw at me?
Fucking Zoroastrianism.
Sure.
Why not?
The one thing that would be an even bigger waste of money than like what we already spent our lives on studying theology.
Well, I don't know, man. This next chapter makes me pissed that I didn't spend more time studying Mesoamerica because I have all these like refutations from my like kind of armchair and like general survey understanding of this topic, and it's like, God damn it.
when you told me that, you know, like you hope I remember some of the stuff from Tom.
Yeah.
I was like, here we go. I was like, we're going into Mesoamerica, South America. Flying gods over America.
Early American civilization is part of a global society. Now, I know this is probably more y'all's alley as far as like symbolism and like different cultures and stuff like that. As to like,
I mean, like
he mentions
took
like
a
kind of
lot
like
classes on
the fact that the
prehistory.
everything is like shared amongst all the cultures, like certain symbols, the architecture, all that kind of
the
stuff.
pyramids, the stepped pyramids of the Maya and
the symbols he mentions, of course, the snake.
early pyramids, like pre. So like Ray, you may not be aware of this, but there were various attempts at pyramids in Egypt before like the Great Pyramid of Giza was constructed.
I'm aware of that. I mean, I didn't think it was like they did it one shot and then they were successful that first time.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, there's like pyramids where like they're figuring out like they're fucking like the angles of the fucking walls and shit.
Okay,
where,
so
like,
there's like structures that show like kind of the work
like,
in progress,
like the evolution of thought or whatever.
Gotcha,
like
okay.
There's literally a pyramid that like collapsed in on itself because the fucking angles were wrong. So there's some like, but there are also some earlier like step pyramids in Egypt, very similar to Mesopotamian mastabas, like or ziggurat kind of super shape or super step pyramid form.
Yeah, because they're fucking huge. Was it the Temple of the Sun?
Of the Toltecs? Yeah, that's bigger than the Pyramid of Giza.
Bigger than Giza. Yeah. It dwarfs it. Just ridiculous.
And what's interesting, because I went and looked for some like little factoids and stuff about the pyramid constructions and some of these similarities.
They used
so I was
a lot
looking
of
up
similar techniques.
So it's thought that the supporting populations in Egypt and in Mexico were, I can't remember like what modern cities that the Pyramid of the Sun is at, but they're thought to have about the same like resident populations, like 30 to 40,000 people. Because initially I was reading Bramley stuff. I was like, well, fuck, the Toltecs were like a big, pretty big empire. They probably had a larger population to, contribute to the construction effort. And then after some Googling around, I went and oh, I guess I was incorrect. So it's not a population
the Toltecs came
thing.
after the Maya, right?
Yes, the Toltec were like one of the groups
Olmecs
that got absorbed into like the Aztec.
Right.
So I believe the Toltecs were like circa 1400s. Because the Aztec were like relatively short-lived. It was kind of like the Inca, how they came in and kind of like absorbed a bunch of other polities and then set their own kind of flavor of statecraft, drawing on earlier traditions of the area.
Well, we can't really like. I mean, you have to kind of just look at their culture, like whatever's left behind, to determine certain things that they attempted to do.
Oh no, sure, but
because I mean,
writing and stuff. And
yeah, well, like the writing and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, like, was a lot of it survived?
They have a lot of
even though like
similarities
there were a lot of wars and stuff like that. Like I read that, or not, like according to the book, like there's a lot of things that were destroyed.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, by the Spanish mostly.
Yeah. So I mean, like those are like those
the
records.
Spanish fucking destroyed so much stuff, but stuff they couldn't destroy or chose not to.
But that was a sort of trend that most cultures did. I mean, like they mentioned the Library of Alexandria and how that was burnt to the ground.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I was
They
kind of
lost
curious
all
as to like in that situation, like were their libraries, so to speak, burnt
Yeah.
to the ground also?
It was
They're
a
destroyed.
bunch of parchments.
Oh, okay.
We have there are a few surviving codices from the Aztec and Maya. There was some. I think he was a Franciscan priest who was a little sympathetic to the cause, and he, basically
He adopted the Popolva. Is that the guy
no,
you're
no,
talking
no,
about?
no. That was another dude. But there was like some priest who fucking
Oh,
damn,
what was his name?
smuggled these out of the fucking country before they got destroyed, and I think there's like something like 7 remaining codices of the Aztec.
Okay.
And some of them have like just crazy amounts of like there are plants that are like drawn out on them and described and stuff, and we don't have an idea of like what those plants actually are supposed to be like.
No.
But there are things in these documents that we can identify, but then there's like plants and things where it's like, well, what is this? And so there's a lot of mystery surrounding this. So like there's a whole bunch of just knowledge that was just completely pillaged and destroyed and fucked up when the Spanish hit the New World. But they didn't fuck up things like some of the bas relief architecture, which had hieroglyphics on it, which researchers were later able to go and say, oh, this is the site of such and such ruled by this dickhead. But what was fucking crazy about Bramley's description of the similarities between, old world sites and new world sites was the person he decided to reference. Raymond Cartier, who Bramley said was a historian. I bitch about this to you guys, in private, but it's when I've started following the citations, I couldn't find anything in English about this guy, only in French. So that was a bit of a bitch. But he's a fucking journalist. Not a historian, which is, I thought was an interesting thing. So it's like, well, what are you trying to do here, Bramley? Is this a little bit of like, just, well, he's talking about his history, so technically he's a historian, even though professionally he's a journalist. So I'm not sure if there was any like, what's the word I'm looking for?
Distinction between them?
Malicious intent by Bramley to misrepresent the facts. But even like Cartier's stuff, like it doesn't really hold up because there's more than just fucking pyramids that are shared in like Maya. So this is more like bitching about Bramley, because Bramley's like, yo, the only thing that stays consistent in Mayalandia is, pyramid construction.
Well, I mean, in the pictures, he's got the comparison between the Eye of Horus and.
But he doesn't say where that fucking other site is in the New World. Because that looks North America, like Mexico is part of North America, but that looks reminiscent of either something that might have been in like the modern United States or maybe down in the fucking Andes.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking it was in South America. From
but it didn't. But and I'm not a fucking expert, but I studied more about North America proper, or not proper, like, but accepting Mexico, but like, Plains Indians and shit and those groups, and then stuff in South America. And iconographically, there's some early stuff in the Andes that looks similar now that I think
pretty
about
suspicious stuff, yeah.
But once again, it's Bramley going, oh, look at these things that are so similar, but then he doesn't really
point to anything
demonstrate
No, he
it
doesn't
or
reference anything
follow
or
the
any
rabbit hole a little
elaboration.
further.
No.
But there's a ton of shit that the fucking folks of Mesoamerica, shared through time. 260-day calendar system, fucking ball courts, along with these pyramids, plaza constructions, and also their pantheon. Even though names change or whatever, but you had like a flying serpent here, a flying serpent there, it could be called Quetzalcoatl, here and there, or by some other name, like Tlaloc of the Maya. But it's kind of a case, just like, as Bramley and Sitchin trace, the pantheons through time, going like, oh, look at this, Council of 12 or whatever, or Council of 9 or what have you. And you have these kind of the same gods with the same features showing up all over the old world.
I think
you have that same shit going on in Mesoamerica.
I think Tlaloc was he was like the shadow god of sorts. Like he was kind of an
rain god as well. Like
when I want to say like his counterpart in the old world was supposed to be Set. If I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure. I forget. I'm pretty weak on Egyptian pantheon.
Oh, it's been fucking.
But there are plenty of fucking
15
parallels.
years since I've probably taken that fucking class.
I
never on Egyptian art.
I never took the Egyptology stuff.
But it just seems like, Bramley's just kind of going like, kind of playing his selective, resources or sourcing again.
Do you kind of determine why this chapter is placed in this particular part of the book?
I have no fucking idea.
It seems like it's kind of out of place considering that
because
it's going along.
He doesn't
most of the time talking
America
about Europe
or like the New World properly until the chapter on the founding of the United States and the World of Fire chapter, and then the Master Smith and the Angel chapters.
Yeah, it is kind of oddly placed.
But yeah, no, this is a weird
more
thing.
Of it, more of him doing this.
But I think he kind of like tries to bring it back towards the end of this chapter. So moving through this a little bit. Fucking Bramley has this one statement that really bothers me because it's also this like another like bold claim doesn't follow it up, where he says that Jungian theories of the collective unconscious are hardly unsatisfactory when in terms of like accounting for like why people around the world are all building pyramids or all making ceramics of a certain style. And it's, well, why not? You just make this real fucking highbrow fucking statement and don't follow it up. Like, fuck you, man. Like, that kind of sucks because because also, Jungian analysis is still super critical in folklore studies and all sorts of shit.
I think it's the collective unconscious.
But
I would believe that more along the lines of myself because, what isn't there? Yeah, just like you mentioned, what isn't there to say that like all of these people have like a similar sort of imagination because like we live in like similar environments and that's where they draw
we all have
inspiration
similar
from.
Bodies, similar mental capacities, you know,
like
then a shared tradition at one point because we all came from the same fucking place, and this sounds like we're getting into real hokey fucking kind of like pseudoscientific stuff because there's nothing to back it up, but it's really weird when you account for all these similarities without contact. Without thinking, aliens or even like a mother culture of some sort that made their way around the globe and kind of like started setting up the seeds of civilization here and there. Cause like there are arguments that, fucking ancient Egyptian or ancient fucking Africans,
made
the voyage over to the New World. And that's why we have pyramids. That's why you have some of the Olmec heads that look like they have like African features and all this shit, I
mean, it is suspicious, but
it's wild.
But again, like I kind of do like the idea of Jung's theory because again, like they pull their themes from nature, and like it's pretty much the same across the entire planet. They're different locales and climates, but wherever you go, a cloud is a cloud, a tree is a tree, and so they can draw similar.
Oh man, there'd be some people that have a
conclusions.
fucking field day with your statements. I knew a bunch of them in grad school, but we're not going to go there.
Yeah, fuck them.
Man.
So do y'all want to?
But all the same, like I'm just saying that, like I think that I don't think that these ideas are like, like Bramley should be as dismissive of them as he seems to be.
I don't know if it's necessarily dismissive. Is that he's kind of just he just generalizes everything, because he's not. Again, he's not trying to
fit into his narrative.
He hasn't gone into any sort of chapter too much to where like any sort of claim that he's making, he brings about like the actual context of it. So I mean, again, also a weird chapter to place in the lineage of whatever's going on right now. So I probably should have done better later on. But anyways, is there anything else you want to add to the bit of this chapter before we move on to the next?
Yeah, just another little bit I bitched about in my notes about he made the claim about, peoples of the early Americas thought that their gods came from the stars or whatever, and then talked about how Quetzalcoatl was allegedly associated with Venus. But I don't know, it's one of the many reasons why I wish I knew more about like Mesoamerican,
yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why
history, but
or one of the things that he's making the claim of, and you have to actually go and find out if you want to believe it. So I mean, that's a lot of notes in the margins to go back and verify for yourself as the reader. Chapter 18, the Black Death.
Yeah.
I actually really enjoyed this chapter, to be honest with you, just because I've known of some of these things for a long time, even before I had actually read this book a couple years ago, or almost over a decade ago. So basically, there's some record showing that like people saw dudes who were dressed in black with what looked like
scythes in their hands.
Is it scythes or seeds?
Scythe.
Okay. Scythe. And they that's where you get like the Grim Reaper kind of image and stuff like that.
They thought that they were swinging scythes over the fields and cutting the wheat, and based on what Bramley here writes in is that they were actually holding like spray guns, and they were spraying like poison.
Yeah, because the description is like these guys were like waving these scythes that weren't cutting the fucking plants and shit.
This sort of ties into what was believed to be the actual sort of reason the plague was spread so much, because they, like we talked about earlier, the two types of plagues. The first type that is transferred from fleas and rats or whatever.
The bubonic
is not,
plague, yeah.
Huh?
Oh, I'm just clarifying the bubonic plague.
Right, the bubonic plague. It's not transmittable. It's not. You can't. It's not transmittable from person to person. But the other one, the pneumonic, is actually related to these, supposedly related to these sightings, because it is prefaced by a mist. A colored mist, I think they say.
A foul-smelling mist. Some of these mists have colors. I think what you're thinking about the color mist stuff is associated with some of the deaths. It's reported in like as this person died from plague, a blue mist, or a blue smoke escaped from their mouth.
Their mouths, yes. But I thought they did report quite a bit of sightings of actual mists in areas of
yes, but I'm not sure if they were like colored or whatever, but they were just like, they call them like foul smelling mists.
Right. And they had no way to defend against this for the most part. I think they mentioned later on that I forgot who suggests it, but they make these giant bonfires, and that is, it's fire. So like it just I think it's posited that this is like a form of germ warfare, bacteria coming in and infecting people, and so fire would obviously sanitize all of that from the area.
Well, Bramley makes mention that one of the reasons it was kind of a puzzling for this Black Death was that it was able to strike on isolated human areas, and then it would end
and also
rapidly.
It would always be in areas where there was no history of like infection kind of thing. It was just
it would hit unseasonally because it hit warm weather environments, and pneumonic plague, where it gets really bad, usually it's like winter and people are in like, tight spaces or whatever.
Right.
And also like pass that shit around, but it's hitting parts of the world where they're basically, in a summer paradise. And then you have droves of people being knocked by stuff that's supposed to be only transmitted by people. And these folks have been isolated forever.
Right.
It's fucking weird.
And do you want to go into like some of the sightings that were pre?
So we talk about the mists. We talk about the plague doctors a little bit. There are also associations of or events of bright lights reported. There were
the large comets.
The 7 comets that were seen. The column of fire over the second Pope's pad in Avignon. Goddamn, just cool stuff, man.
So
normally with like
between
certain sightings such as this and the immediate following of this plague, I mean, people have just pretty much associated the two together. So
right,
it's a sign
omen,
from God.
That's
a bad omen, something's about to come, and then sure enough, the plague shows up.
Yeah, they mention a lot of sightings of comets, or rather, what they refer to as comets, that is posited to be UFO activity. In actuality, UFO was
and with these plagues, like in the times of Justinian and stuff, and in the time of, ancient society or more ancient societies that were promoting these, apocalyptic messages, or religions rather. Well, this is another case of like an end of the world cataclysm. So is the fucking, Messiah coming? And so this could be, population control or just, chemical warfare by not friendly custodial forces, or a way for the custodians to help perpetuate these apocalyptic doctrines.
Right.
Because people hit these times of stress and they start going, "Oh Jesus, save us!"
But
you must be coming.
Supposedly isn't a new phenomenon, because he does mention here that the Mesopotamian have records of what may be seen as chemical or biological defoliants in the air that are used. So it's just another association to custodial fuckery.
Yeah. What was the part I did like is this says that there was a vision of strange men to the oat fields, was followed by the immediate severe of the outbreak as well. It was a plague in Brandenburg, and mind you, the plague it's giving sightings from different parts of the world where the plague struck, and then they saw these things prior to that happening.
Yeah, like separate events within these plague years.
Don't they mention one of the sightings is like they see the men in black, and like there's like a coffin floating above them or some such.
Oh, they
see it, which I thought that was nuts. Like, really?
Well,
there was one example where like it was a sighting that was there for days before it actually like it dissipated or left. I want to say there were lights that were floating for an extended period. So yeah, there's just a lot of really crazy stuff.
Yeah, I want to take an excerpt from Bramley here. It says, strange men dressed in black, demons in quotes, and other terrifying figures were observed in other European communities. The frightening creatures were often observed carrying long brooms, scythes, or swords that were used to sweep or knock at the doors of people's homes. So they weren't just in the fucking fields; they were going around like.
No.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, that's already
freaky
freaky enough as it is, right? The inhabitants of those homes fell ill with the plague afterwards, and it was from these reports that the people created the popular image of death as a skeleton or demon carrying a scythe. The scythe came to symbolize the act of death, mowing down people like stalks of grain and looking at this haunting image of death. That's pretty fucking scary, man. I mean, dude, some random ass dude coming to your house dressed in black with a fucking
knocks on your door.
knocks on your fucking door, like.
I mean, have a minute to talk about the Lord.
That kind of like that's almost like the personification of the angel of death in is it the book of Exodus, where the angel of death comes through the Egypt and like kills the firstborn.
What's the name of the angel of death? Was that Uriel? I forgot.
I don't know, like if it's named in the actual book, but I just know it's the angel of death. That's all. And it also comes like I mean, if I'm gonna go by the interpretation of the Ten Commandments as a green mist coming through the town, which I mean, it could have been not that
heavy
specific.
fart.
I don't remember the actual quote from the Bible itself, so I couldn't tell you.
I think it was more turquoise. Thank you.
It was more indigo.
Scholars do disagree.
Let me see here. Let's see. Mists, vile smelling mists. Again, things in the sky. We have the sun turning to red, but that has to do with like a eclipse.
They sighted a monstrous whale in the sky.
Oh yeah.
Couldn't that be like more of just hallucination from the sickness? Maybe. Oh, but they're not
sounds
sick
like
before,
a Zeppelin.
right? Yeah.
I don't know.
Shit,
Maybe.
okay.
Yeah. Mass hallucination.
Yeah.
I don't know. You guys had COVID recently. Like, you tell me.
I didn't have any hallucinations.
That would have been a nice
distraction. My mind was frozen solid. So.
Nope. I felt like I jumped in lava, so I didn't quite have that experience.
Nah, I didn't really have the fever necessarily. It was just being frozen and barely able to breathe.
I had both.
So.
Like I had these like painful chills.
I can imagine if you had a fever and the temperature is below like 25 or 20, 25, 28, somewhere there. No power, no heat. It's going to get pretty rough.
Yeah, it's great timing. Fucking wonderful. Crack out the barbecue pit to heat up my Campbell's.
There was also the fact that the bubonic and pneumonic plagues weren't the only infectious diseases that carried that spread strange lethal fogs or mists.
Cholera and a couple
right. Yeah, they do.
Some intestinal disease. Mm-hmm. I mean, like.
Here we go. Let me go ahead and read that if you don't mind.
Yes,
when
please
cholera
go ahead,
broke out on her. On board Her Majesty's ship Britannia in the Black Sea in 1854, several officers and men asserted positively that immediately prior to the outbreak, a curious dark mist swept up from the sea and passed over the ship. The mist had barely cleared the vessel when the first case of disease was announced. And then they also mentioned the blue mists as another connection to cholera. Yeah.
Roland, you had mentioned the coffin. That's on page 192 when they're discussing the December nights in the year 1664. It says
distinctive.
About east it rose, reaching no great altitude, and sank below the southwest horizon between 2 or 3 o'clock. In a week or two, it was gone. Then letters came from Vienna notifying that the sight of the brilliant comet and the air of the appearance of a coffin, which causes great anxiety of thought amongst the people.
Yeah, no shit. I think that's a pretty easy given, right?
It's just a coffin, guys. Relax.
Right, yeah. Don't be a pussy.
Just chill.
I mean, he was only hanging out for a week. Whatever, yeah.
And it's, Bramley says like the UFO civilization has no disease. That's later on 192. It says
yeah, and I was like, wait, what?
How does he know that?
Yeah, okay. Sure.
It says some of the claim that the UFOs are here to help mankind and that UFOs will eradicate disease on Earth. The UFO civilization reportedly has no disease. Who reported it?
Yeah, what?
If the custodial civilization is indeed so healthy, perhaps it is only because it is not bombarding itself with germ weapons. And if UFOs truly intended
that's almost like a non sequitur there, Bramley. Like,
if the UFOs truly intended to bring health to the human race, maybe all they needed to do was to stop spraying infectious biological agents into the air. Was that it?
Well, apparently.
Would that really help?
And he does mention that it, like, not only that it
killed people that it caused like psychological, basically PTSD amongst the people.
Yeah, I mean, sure, that's a byproduct of the infection, right? Mass trauma everywhere.
And he does mention within all this sickness and dying that the Christians had a renewed interest in exterminating the Jews.
Yes. Apparently in Spain and Germany, Jews were blamed for fucking like
All of that.
The plague.
dealing with the devil or whatever, to fucking get plague going about. And but Bramley ties it back to the Brotherhood because surprise, surprise, as far as the instigators in Germany went, most of them were from members of trade guilds that frequently had ties to the Brotherhood. But of course, he didn't say what groups, what ties.
No.
Just trust me, dude. They're Brotherhood motherfuckers,
I mean, he just uses like the barest examples. Oh, they have initiation rites. Oh, they have mystical beliefs. Oh, they're a secret society, and these are all hallmark features of Brotherhood influence and development, sort of thing. So that's about as far as any of them go. Actually, that's like those are like his main reasonings for pretty much all of these organizations that he mentions, which I think that's kind of funny because I don't know why I was thinking of that collective unconsciousness stuff again. That like, okay, say that these guys are all completely unrelated to each other, and he's like the opposite is true of what he's trying to convey. And I just thought that would be funny to me. They have nothing to do with each other. They just independently developed on their own. And so, you're wrong, Bramley. But whatever.
Well, the combination of all these catastrophes, the plague, the genocides of, Inquisition and stuff like that.
Right.
It says that Bramley says that the Catholic Church was on the brink of collapse, and that eventually during these times, like that's when like new messages start to come about, or new messengers, so to speak. So it says a great many people were proclaiming that the end days were at hand. Well, I mean, obviously, right? You see comets, you see coffins, you see fucking mist.
dying.
Everybody's dying.
I mean, what was it, like 50% of the population or some such?
Well, I don't know the extent of that, but I mean...
No. Like, that was a Bramley figure.
Okay, I don't remember that.
It was like roughly supposed to be like 50% of the population of Europe went down. Like,
well, it's not of the world, right? It's just of like Europe, though.
Well, the known world.
Of Europe, yeah.
The known world, okay, gotcha.
The Europe,
world.
yeah,
Right.
like
the Europe. Yeah. Okay, it says, true to prophecy, out of the tumult emerged new messengers from God with promises of imminent utopia, and the teachings and proclamations of those new messiahs. I don't know if the messiahs is correct, but I mean, it had an electrifying effect on the ravaged Europeans and brought about an event of major importance, the Protestant Reformation.
He's throwing that word around a little too liberally.
What, the Messiah?
For my liking, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I assume he's referring to like.
I
I assume he's referring to like the offshoots of Christianity that like are talked about in these later chapters.
I don't think I've ever heard Martin Luther referred to as a Messiah, like ever.
No. And
or even like Joseph Smith or anything.
It's like all I've ever like heard him of. Like,
yeah. And
So,
I don't think he would think of himself as that anyway, either.
Well, no, I mean, that would be blasphemous, wouldn't it? I mean, because Jesus is the Messiah. But...
Exactly.
No, see, now, potentially he could have been a Messiah if his, version of Christianity was that, science of salvation,
Oh, I guess so, yeah. But
but I think but he didn't he wasn't proclaimed or claimed to be Messiah, but he had kind of the similar path where he was like, here is the way we need to do things. And I'm just trying to like help you guys out a little bit.
I don't know that I would refer to like what he tried to do as a science at all. Like it just seemed more that like he was
But
adapting
isn't
it to his
kind
own.
of funny how
to his own
Bramley
belief.
has a contradiction in terms to begin with when he talks about the signs of the spirit?
Okay, hold on. We like that's the next chapter. Excuse me, before I get into that about Martin Luther. Chapter 19, Luther and the Rose. That is to say, Martin Luther. Sort of just starting or where I left off in talking about how Martin Luther, that is, was he was a Catholic priest, right? And he became dissatisfied with the practice of confession, the confessional. That is to say,
maybe we should bring Jamie in on this. He's the Lutheran in this whole thing.
He's a Lutheran, yeah. So I do like some like the idea that he changes the path to salvation, the path to forgiveness, only in that like it's.
But Roland, you're skipping over so much cool stuff in this chapter too, though. Like,
oh my gosh! I just wanted to segue to talk about that, but if you want to go back in order, go ahead. You're right.
I guess we could,
No, you're right. You're right. Go ahead. It's fine.
Because also this is like another Bramley like missed opportunity or overlooked opportunity.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He only mentions these guys like what? In a few so far, like I don't know if it's brought up in the rest of the book, but I'm referring to the Illuminati.
Yeah, so the Illuminati does come back up later, but it's mostly referring to Weishaupt's like false Illuminati, as it's kind of known as. But Bramley once again kind of just goes, "Trust me on this. This is what happened." So apparently in Germany and other places, the Brotherhood became to be called the Illuminati. But then let's move on. He then invokes the Rosicrucians.
That's a hell of a transition, though, to go from the Brotherhood to Illuminati, and there's no other explanation.
It's not explored, and so like it'd be cool to because he just gives like offhand reference to like he just kind of like he'll kind of like flip kind of interchangeably.
I think he just mentions it as a way to talk about.
Mostly he sticks to Brotherhood, unless it's a case of like talk about like Weishaupt's Illuminati, where he goes, "Oh, it's not that Illuminati," blah blah blah.
The hip hop Illuminati.
Get there next episode, but
I just think he used it as a platform to segue into the Rosicrucians because they're a branch of the Illuminati, and that's where he makes the association to Martin, the direct association of Martin Luther.
Right, but the thing is, like, okay, so the Brotherhood becomes known as the Illuminati, whatever. Right. Now, what influence does the Illuminati have at kind of like face value, or at least because it's the same fucking dudes. It's just all of a sudden they've rebranded themselves. But now you've got all these other kind of groups that are kind of like breaking off of these traditions, which I think is fascinating. But because like specifically like the Rosicrucians and the Friends of God.
Sure.
But not like the Freemasons later, because those are just, recycled organizations that now have newly politicized or just a shakeup of how their political units of terror. But anyway.
Okay.
So the Rosicrucians, though, I did get really caught up in the idea of that 108-year cycle they go through.
Yeah, that's interesting, where they have the period of activity and inactivity, right?
Yeah, it's like outward versus like closed activity. So in times of like outward activity, for 108 years, they're out there just actually going like, "Hey, you there on the street, have you heard of Rosicrucianism?"
Right, yeah.
"Let's go have a chat." And then they're just like recruiting whoever the fuck,
they're converting everyone they can.
And then after that 108 years ends, they go to their closed cycles where recruitment still happens, but it's only to like family members of existing members.
Right.
And they don't fucking advertise. They're not printing pamphlets. They're not knocking on doors. And so it gets this, and Bramley talks about this, and I don't remember the exact verbiage, but it's like, so it has this appearance that like, the Rosicrucians just disappear and then reemerge in history.
So basically they're just like taking care of their own for a huge period of time. They're out there like recruiting, then they kind of take care of their own.
Well, I think it's like,
would it make sense that they're consolidating their,
because it sounds like, or seemed to me like when they're in the outward phase, they're out there like fucking, Jehovah's Witnesses, just out
Right.
proclaiming,
Right,
the
right.
Rosicrucian
Everybody in.
ideals. But then I think in those 108-year cycles, that's when they go to plot their next moves and then perhaps like really indoctrinate the generations of the new members that they
gotcha.
recruited. Because like you've got, potentially 3-4 generations. Say you get someone right at that beginning of the outward activity, then they kind of buy in.
So
But
basically,
then
like,
it's about indoctrinating the kids and stuff.
Yeah.
So then they are more perfected agents in those
Right.
periods of outward activity for the recruitment. And then you go and
so basically, just strengthen that foundation of their.
I think
religion
so.
and then just like move on.
or at
yeah.
least, this is me spitballing, but it would make sense because then you can really go like, all right, here's
Yeah,
what your
that's how
ancestors
they-
didn't get to find out or whatever.
Right,
And
right,
here's what
uh-huh.
we're really about.
You know,
and then
after-
those values get taught again to the kids in the period of the outward. And so you just keep,
It seems like a very strategic way to build the belief
just
system.
perpetuating
Yeah.
that core ideal, and then you can also perpetuate and then move forward through time because you can get more sinister with the close periods
Right.
because generation to generation get indoctrinated.
Right. All right.
Wow. All right. Welcome to MoQuest, Valley Strange episode, another whatever. We're talking about Rosicrucianism today and what we think about it, even though we know very little. So like that's all dope. And then once again, it's interesting how banking interests come into play with the Friends of God.
So we're talking about Rosicrucians and like their periods of
Activity and
activity
inactivity.
and inactivity according to the outside world, but I mean they're still
Right, yeah.
going pretty
But
strong. though.
So like I had mentioned before, was like they were just consolidating their I guess their power within those dormancy phases, and then basically creating dynasties of followers, families through their families, and I guess generational. Because like obviously within the 108 years, they're going to have a new several new grandmasters. So like it just sort of keeps it within the family and it allows them to just constantly not reinvent themselves, but to, like you mentioned, reinforce their system. Yeah. No, it's so.
Then the next group that gets brought up, which also gets kind of short shrift by Bramley, be the Friends of God.
Which was the religious organization that the Rosicrucians supported.
Yeah, they were apocalyptic, surprise.
Yeah.
But they also helped inspire the Protestant Reformation because we finally get the goddamn Medicis into the fucking picture. They should have been probably invoked during there should have been probably like another Renaissance era chapter talking about the development of the banking families and shit. Because
There's
the
so much
Medicis
about
are
the
fucking
Medicis.
crazy, right?
That family's. I see the advent of the Italian mafia.
Yeah,
they're responsible for creating the banking system, and they
sponsored fucking popes. They fucking
they were the ones responsible for introducing
incredibly
politics,
wealthy, incredibly powerful, and
politics into
far-reaching.
the priesthood. So that was when, the papacy moved out from just being devout into like an actual a system of control and exploitation, actually, because
it's like
they took advantage of the religion to take as much. They were the ones that sort of introduced the idea of doing good deeds for salvation, sort of thing.
Oh, indulgences, yeah,
right, indulgences. Thank you. And that was one of the things that.
Well, Bramley goes into this, but to fill that out a little bit for the Fever Boy, the Medicis got into good favor with the Catholic Church because they became like the thugs that would collect the taxes that the Pope would collect and also tithes.
Right.
And at this time, also the church got into indulgences, where it's basically pay money for a get out of jail free card or get out of jail card. I guess you paid for it for a particular sin, and different sins at different, kind of cash values associated with them. And that's one of the things that Luther was fucking like, fuck you guys about.
Was he upset with that, or was he? Because I thought he was upset with the idea of confession itself, in of itself. Because didn't he say that apparently there was?
It's multivalent. Like he had 95 things he bitched about, but one thing he did bitch about that I remember it was discussing like mainstream like high school history course stuff was that he didn't think that the paying of indulgences was a thing, because I think that also like tied into his like confession thing.
Yeah, I think he says here that there were certain things that there were also certain things he didn't want to confess. He didn't want to confess. So I was just thinking, like,
it was also not just that he didn't feel he could, or that he couldn't recall properly to confess. He was like, well, what if I forget this sin? Then how can I actually be like fucking absolved by the priest when I've actually not fully bared out how I, stuck my tongue out at the fucking, brat kid at the bus station,
sinner. Or maybe he wiped was it front to back instead of back to front, and like tossed it in the trash can instead of flushed it down the drain. Son of a bitch. I don't know.
Just placed it in the hole.
I thought it was kind of. I don't know that it was. He set out to be. What's the fucking word I'm trying to think of? Like, it seems like he had sort of like petty reasons to me for striking out on his own. But again, though, I did like the idea that he came up with to sort of make that disconnect from the confessional and the tithes, in saying that, look, you're not in charge of your own salvation. That is only determined by God, and the only thing that you can do in your with respect to yourself is to be devout, to be a good Christian or whatever, to believe, to have the faith, and that's it.
All right. So here's Wikipedia to the rescue, because we're both right.
Oh boy.
It's the 95 Theses, or Disputation on the Power and Efficacy of Indulgences. But this is where he also lays out the whole thing where it's like, grace only comes from God, believe in the Jeebus and all that shit,
Right.
But it was also, so it was like bitching about some Catholic institutions, and also like what's the actual like path to salvation, I guess.
Yeah.
Because he also downplayed, the whole like faith is secured through deeds or whatever, which was like a Catholic, still like a linchpin, do good deeds or whatever, and that's going to help or whatever.
Yeah, they do mention the tenets of karma.
That doesn't matter. Like,
yeah. It is a weird little like contradiction, because they do mention like the ideas of karma, and that like you're building up this goodwill for yourself through your actions, or the opposite, depending on your choices, right? It could also go the other opposite direction, which, from what he says, is it's kind of like the opposite, in saying that like, well, no, it isn't the opposite, because there are supposed to, because having I assume the connotations of having faith, a devout faith in God, are positive in nature. All right, so like that's the good shit for you. But the guy sounds like a dick, to be honest.
Martin Luther.
Yeah.
Got to be kind of dickish to break away from a huge organization like the Catholic Church,
That's still like one of the world's most powerful groups on the planet,
Imagine if the Pope broke away from the Catholic Church. How fucking major would that be,
Well, I mean, it's sort of...
he's not going to Pope, but he comes out speaking against the Catholic Church from being a Pope.
So, I mean, this sort of started from what I could read about the Protestants, which is what that sort of developed to, unless I'm wrong.
Yeah.
They seem to be some of the most violent religions up until this point, because like the warfare is directly incorporated into their beliefs in that, like.
And we would get to that today, but it's going to be for next episode.
Oh shit.
Yeah, because for a little teaser for the next episode. The Protestant faith spins out the Puritans.
Peace is a sin.
Cromwell's England is a kind of an interesting place, but we'll get there, guys. Just next episode. just bear with us. But for now, we get into the Counter-Reformation, which I don't think we should really talk about right now, because there is isn't there like a whole...
I think there's a whole chapter full of it.
On that. Yeah. No, it's the Glorious Reformation. Okay, 1 second. I need to consult my book, I guess.
Jesus Christ, I can hear my pulse in my ears.
Oh, okay. So
Jesus.
The Counter-Reformation. So Luther and his supporters created the single largest schism in Christian history. Enormous powers rested from the Roman Catholic Church. Catholics didn't like that. So they launched a Counter-Reformation, which was an attempt to try to like squash out these Protestant beliefs before they could take flight. And in order to help do this, the Order of the Jesuits was created, and they're a fucking militant organization.
They weren't at first, weren't they? Or was that like a part of their initial formation?
Nope. Leading the Counter-Reformation was, interestingly, a new Brotherhood-style organization created for the purpose, the Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits. The Jesuit order was founded in 1540 by a soldier-turned-cleric named Ignatius of Loyola. And they were a Catholic secret society with degrees of initiation, periods of probation, and many secret rituals, and it was also militant. And so... guess they try to have, but there's not really like a talk about like them like actually fighting them or whatever.
No, yeah, he just. Actually, I think that was the only time I remember that it was even mentioned. It's just sort of that one section, and then that was it.
I guess one thing is still kind of relevant though, even today, is most importantly, many of the positive effects of the Reformation were offset by the fact that Protestantism has yet one more human faction placed in unresolvable conflict with other factions over erroneous religious issues. Luther himself contributed this by hinting that the Pope represented the forces of the Antichrist. This has only resulted in more war, notably in Ireland today. Because, shit, man. Ireland be cool to visit and stuff, but then it's like, people are still fucking like setting up fucking car bombs and shit. Like,
it's pretty wild.
Chapter 20, A New Aristocracy. Sorry.
Actually, I think it just talked about exactly what you were mentioning, the Luther's Revolution, right?
Well, importantly, it brings up the 80 Years' War, which is like one of the first conflicts that arose out like right after the Reformation happened. So
the introduction of Calvinism.
It's funny that after the Reformation, you would think like it's supposed to bring about like a new message of peace, which it does, but it always ends up starting some other conflict, and then wars breaks out of somewhere because people don't like someone else telling them that their belief is wrong, and let's start fighting.
And then it only exacerbates later on when the banks get involved, because then it becomes the business of war.
Quit that commie talk, right?
Huh?
But with the 80 Years' War, what had occurred was conflict broke out, basically like Protestants versus Catholics in modern day Holland and versus Spain. And one of the people to help lead the charge in Holland was what was his name? William I the Silent. He was a German ruler who reigned over the German Principality of Nassau. And this is where we get our first kind of taste of the House of Orange, Nassau or Naton, or I'm not sure how it's pronounced.
It's Nassau, yeah, sure.
Or Nazi. But the House of Orange.
Orange.
They become pretty fucking relevant in the coming chapters.
For a very long time.
And actually, they're relevant today. Like they're surviving members of these, political marriages and stuff that are still in power today. But
they were experts. Speaking of political marriage, they pretty much used it as their main tool to
so
spread their influence.
So Holland, I believe, does gain its independence from Spain after this war, but the House of Orange fucking marries into the Dutch royalty, thus establishing the first, House of Orange family tie that's going to start spreading throughout fucking Europe here pretty soon in these next chapters we're going to cover next up. But importantly, this is the first time we start establishing kind of the new regime of how things are going to start looking in Europe. This is when we start introducing an inflatable paper currency.
Right.
This is where we start reducing the power of the monarchy and creating stronger parliaments. And engaging in a lot of fucking warfare. And this is a cycle that's going to keep repeating throughout European history for hundreds of years. And this is like some of the first incipient, incipient activity of, the beer's starting to work, but it's, it sets these, three main elements, the fucking central bank with paper, inflatable paper money.
They start
fucking weak monarchy, stronger parliament.
Standard.
It's just going to keep coming up and up and up and up. And you're going to see economies ravaged by it, a bunch of bloodshed over it. And it's fucking fascinating.
Do you think that the custodial beings may have been pleased with this type of cycle? Maybe they thought this was working for constantly to keep people enslaved.
I mean, yeah.
Like at some point or another, we kind of broke out of it a little bit, but still here.
So at one point, like the banks of like the House of Orange would like control another region and then set that region to fight others and like another area that they also controlled. So like they were playing themselves against themselves and like pulling money from both.
But that's exactly what
one of the reasons
the goal is. That technically, isn't it? I mean,
exactly. Yeah. It is the goal to keep like infighting.
And importantly, without these central banks and like in these and the inflatable paper currency, and we're going to get into more detail of this in the next few chapters. But it's all goes back to the fact that this new type of currency helps continue military campaigns and war efforts and shit. And they're able to, and these people are trying to set up these new banks in other countries like France, England, Germany, and other places. It's usually under the auspices of like the English threat to France that we need to get this bank together because we have to be able to fucking, supply our fucking, buy fucking guns or fucking, I guess, sabers at that time.
And so eventually, like everyone starts adopting that system, the banking system, and
but
all of them go into debt. I mean, later on, England itself ends up going bankrupt from the after the American Revolution. because of all the money that they took out.
Right.
And
loan.
another pattern that's going to occur, that's going to reemerge is that the banking class becomes
The New Aristocracy.
the new aristocracy. Yes, precisely. But also, but then these assholes are later, and we're going to get into more detail in the next episode. So we'll just preface it now. But these same assholes are able to pull their resources,
Right.
make the bank, become the fucking, grand pimp daddy,
Control the wealth.
fucking allowance givers of the fucking nation state that they say they represent. And they are fucking private institutions.
Thank you, Custodial.
Fuck the
beans.
Fed, right?
Yeah.
Fuck the Fed. That's what
Well, I
I'm saying.
mean, that's like the yeah, exactly. That's like leads to the direct creation of what we know as the Federal Reserve. Yeah, that's
Right.
a bank that is exclusive.
Is it really a
serviced.
bank though?
I mean,
I don't think there's
Yes.
a debit card that
Yeah, there's not
fucking
the
Trump
Federal
went up
Reserve
to,
Bank.
it is, but it's a bank
Well, the
that
thing
only
is,
serves the
it's-
government.
Yeah, but they
nobody
only
can,
fucking deal with the government.
yeah.
They're
that's-
exclusive to the government. That's it.
But the thing is, we all know they don't really need to be there.
No,
They pretty much set
absolutely not.
themselves up. They set
No, no,
themselves
no.
up to be there. Yeah, it's all.
No, it's a form of control.
It's another
and,
conspiracy we can get down into some other time, talking about the Federal
God damn
Reserve.
it, we need to get in some Ike. In 5 years, we'll get an Ike. I think we'll be ready in maybe 5 years' time.
Yeah.
All right. Oh boy.
Okay. Well, anything else to add for this chapter, guys? I mean, I think you pretty much covered most
Not
of it.
anything else that's not going to come up in the future because
Right.
it's Bramley. I'll mention a bunch of cool stuff now, and then just let it lie. And then 10 chapters later, here it is again.
All right, that'll be it for this episode. Again, I don't remember which episode number we're on. It's been so long. But we will be finishing this book in a regular schedule. So I'm not sure when this will come out, but 2 weeks after that one, the new one will come out. If I can keep that schedule going. Depends on how long it takes me to edit and stuff like that, but we should be good. So we'll continue chapters 21 through 30 next time, and then you'll get chapters 31 through 41 after that. So I am happy to be back, and Roland, hope you feel better the next time.
I'm alive.
You are alive, and that's
good.
That's all I can ask for at this point.
Yay.
So spray your studio with Lysol. Get those germs out, man. Daniel,
Yeah,
your room seems sanitized.
Get
You got
those.
Chucky up there keeping tabs on everything, so seems pretty good.
Hey.
Well, if you could see it, he's got a big old Chucky in the top, which is really
I
nice.
totally do. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I also have Han and Luke and Boba Fett over there, the Doctor, a bunch of shit.
Nice.
So,
All right. I guess we'll see y'all next time. It's a good thing you can't see the video because Roland just gave us a nice smile. Probably hurt your
probably
eyes.
broke your fucking feed.
All right. We'll see you next time.
I'll see you, dudes.
Laters.
Little midgets come into my house. Hey, it's ridiculous. The guy who had some kind of a rectal probe. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. Ridiculous.